Hey guys, tonight we wake up in a bedroom so cold you can see your breath, but don't you dare shiver too loudly. The wallpaper is peeling just a touch in the corners, the windows are laced with frost so thick it looks like the glass has gone blind, and your chamber pot sits frozen solid under the bed. Welcome to winter in the Victorian era. You're not alone though. You're in good company with thousands of Londoners who went to sleep wearing gloves, scarves and sometimes even their boots, just to make it through the night. And the morning? Oh, it begins with a test. Not of strength, but of manners. The first challenge is peeling yourself from a mattress as stiff as a cold ham. But there's no flailing or grunting allowed. You must rise with grace, your breath curling like incense in the cold, and begin the day's small rituals with all the calm of a duchess sipping tea. Never mind that your fingers have gone numb. You reach for your bedgown, stiff from the chill, and pull it on over your nightshirt. Heaven forbid your ankles be exposed. Modesty never takes a winter break. You shuffle over to the basin, which has a decorative pitcher of water sitting atop it. Beautiful, but frozen. Yes, the water has become a miniature skating rink. Still, etiquette says you should wash your face. And so, with trembling hands, you break the ice like a desperate swan pecking for food, splash a few dagger-cold drops onto your cheeks, and try not to yelp. Behind you, someone knocks lightly, probably your maid, carrying in a lukewarm cup of tea and a cloth warmed slightly by the kitchen hearth. She doesn't speak. It wouldn't be proper at this hour. Besides, her breath fogs the air between you like a secret. And you both know you're not to mention the cold. You sit at your little writing desk, glancing at the frost-rimed windows. Outside, it's all chimney smoke and grey slush. Inside, there's the ticking of the clock and the quiet hum of endurance. You begin your morning letter, yes, with your gloves still on. The ink freezes if you dawdle. So you write quickly, the nib scratching on the paper like a tiny desperate creature clawing at escape. Your thoughts stray to the parlour downstairs, still dark and frigid. You'll be allowed there soon, but not yet. Not before the fires are lit and the seats arranged according to invisible rules. You're not the master or mistress of the house, after all. You're young. That means you wait your turn for the fire, the porridge, even for your boots to be warmed. You remember last year's mistake when you wore damp boots straight from the floor and spent the afternoon sneezing. Not from illness, but from shame. No one says a word when you sneeze at the breakfast table, but the silence is withering. There's a hierarchy of warmth in this house, and you, dear listener, are squarely in the lower ranks, but chin up. You're allowed to warm your hands at the hallway gas sconce if you're quick, and if no one sees you, that's something. And now, the bell. Breakfast is ready. You take one last glance in the mirror, seeing your reflection shiver back at you. But remember, posture is everything. A bent spine invites gossip, a firm chin and good gloves hide many sins, including the fact that you haven't bathed in 3 days because frankly the water's been solid as granite. All right, before you get too cozy, go ahead and smash that like button and subscribe, but only if your heart says yes. And tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it over there? Dim the lights, get that fan going for some background vibes, and let's chill into tonight's little adventure. The descent to breakfast is a daily pilgrimage. You tread carefully down the narrow stairs, hand brushing the wall for balance, not because you're unsteady, but because the wood banister is too cold to touch without gloves. Below, the air thickens with the smell of coal smoke and boiled oats. It's not unpleasant exactly, just heavy. A reminder that warmth, like everything else here, must be earned. In the dining room, the windows are crusted with frost, filtering in a pale light that makes everything look like it's been dipped in chalk. Your older cousin sits nearest the fireplace naturally. He's the eldest male and therefore closest to the heat. You take your seat down the table. far enough away that the warmth doesn't quite reach you. Your breath still puffs in little clouds over your teacup. Conversation is minimal. The rules of morning dining are strict. No complaining about the cold, no sniffing either. It's considered vulgar. If your nose is running, you handle it discreetly with a lace handkerchief and a strategically timed turn of the head. Your aunt once said that a true lady can survive a blizzard with nothing but poison linen. A servant enters with the porridge, lukewarm as always. He tries to suppress a cough, but you notice. Everyone does. But no one says a word. To comment would be impolite, and to acknowledge illness at the table is almost as bad as bringing it in the first place. Instead, you quietly stir a spoonful of jam into your bowl, watching it pool like rubies on grey paste. Luxury in small doses. Your mind wanders to the rumours. Mrs. Ellingsworth down the lane supposedly hired a coal boy just to warm the footrests before guests arrived. Scandalous and clever. Your own household would never stoop to such things, not publicly at least. Etiquette, after all, is often just well-rehearsed denial. Everyone is cold, no one admits it. You excuse yourself after the meal with a quiet nod and retreat to the drawing room. It's still cold, but at least the fire has been coaxed into a reluctant glow. You huddle near it, palms out, back straight. You think longingly of the infamous Lady Moulton, who, according to family gossip, once wore a rabbit-lined petticoat so thick she fainted at church. Everyone whispered about her decorum, but secretly they admired her ingenuity. A knock at the front door breaks your thoughts. It's the milk delivery boy, cheeks chapped red, eyes watery. The butler takes the delivery with tongs, not because of germs, though those are feared, but because touching wet bottles in this weather can peel the skin from your fingers. The boy bows, then disappears into the fog. You linger by the fire a moment longer, then rise to fetch your writing portfolio. You've letters to send, and every envelope must be perfectly creased, each corner aligned. Sloppiness implies disorder, and disorder suggests decline. And in a winter like this, decline is closer than it seems. The cold has its own manners, slow, creeping, invisible. It peels paint from walls, saps ink from pens, and if you're not careful, it peels away civility too, but not you. You tuck your scarf tighter, adjust your posture, and walk out of the room as though your knees aren't knocking together under 3 layers of wool. You have a long day ahead, layers to maintain, expressions to compose, and above all, the rules of winter etiquette to follow. Because in the Victorian world, surviving the cold wasn't just about firewood. It was about never letting anyone see you shiver. You descend the stairs again a few hours later, this time with your gloves properly buttoned and a well-practiced air of indifference to the cold. The household has warmed by a degree or two. Someone must have bribed the scullery maid to keep the kitchen doors cracked open, but your nose still feels like it belongs to someone else. You drift toward the parlour, drawn by the faint promise of heat and the even fainter chance of seating near the fire. Ah, but here is where the real games begin. The fireplace is the throne of the Victorian household in winter, and like all thrones, it comes with a strict and invisible pecking order. Who gets the warmest spot? Not the youngest, not the kindest, not the coldest. The answer lies in a complex calculus of social rank, gender, marital status, age, and whose gout is acting up that morning. You enter and immediately scan the room. 3 chairs arranged in a shallow crescent around the hearth. The centre chair closest to the fire is already occupied by your grandmother, who hasn't moved since sunrise. She's bundled in a lap blanket the size of a ship's sail and holding a half-empty teacup like it's the Holy Grail. She does not speak, but her presence is territorial. That chair is hers. It has always been hers. It may be hers even after she dies. To her right, Your uncle is pretending to read a newspaper while blocking the heat with both knees and an outstretched boot. He glances at you, offers no gesture of welcome. To her left, the seat is unclaimed, but you wouldn't dare. That's your father's spot, and he's due back from his walk any moment now. It would be a quiet scandal to sit there, the kind that ends up in someone's diary. You take a position on the settee near the window, where the draught flutters the drapery just enough to make your fingers ache. This, you know, is your place in the household's thermal hierarchy, somewhere between vaguely tolerated and entirely forgotten. The rules are ancient and unspoken, but they shape your day. You cannot ask to sit closer to the fire. That would imply entitlement. Instead, you must wait until someone leaves, ideally due to urgent business or death. Until then, you smile and endure. You make small talk about the weather as if it weren't trying to kill you, and you tuck your toes under your skirt to stop the tingling. The hearth itself is a living thing. Its warmth is not democratic. It radiates unevenly, whimsically, playing favourites. You watch a log shift in the grate, sending a shower of sparks up the flue, and feel an almost religious jealousy toward the family cat who's been granted a spot right on the hearthrug. She stretches luxuriously, tail twitching, and you swear she smirks. There was a tale once, perhaps apocryphal, of a visiting gentleman who, misunderstanding the seating order, plopped himself in the grandmother's chair. He was never invited back. In fact, the next Christmas, someone mailed him a hand-stitched cushion that read, "Know your place." It's a joke, of course, but it's not funny. Your sister enters, slightly flushed from the cold, and eyes the seating like a chessboard. She chooses the piano stool, brave, but distant. You nod in solidarity. There's no use fighting the fire's court. You're not among its favourites. Not yet. You try not to look at the fire too long. It feels like yearning, and yearning is unbecoming. So instead, you study the room. The wallpaper, once a cheerful floral, is dulled to a sort of winter beige. A brass coal scuttle sits beside the hearth, dented from years of use, its black contents dwindling like the family budget. You've heard whispers that coal deliveries are getting more expensive and that your father now keeps the best lumps in a locked cellar bin marked private. Drawing room use only. You wonder what would happen if you brought it up. "Shall I fetch another shovel for the fire, father?" No, that would imply the current fire is lacking, and that's not your place to say. You're not the firekeeper, nor the fire critic. You're a bystander in the thermal politics of this house. If you feel cold, the correct response is to appear interested in the view, or embroidery, or a book you can't quite hold steady because your fingers have gone stiff. The fire crackles. It almost sounds like laughter. Your cousin eventually walks in, stomping snow off his boots and radiating the smug heat of someone who's just come from outside and wants you to ask about it. He says, "Brisk out there," with the casual menace of someone who knows he'll get the footstool. You smile politely and shift your knees aside. He takes his place flush against the flames, rubbing his hands with performative glee. "They say it might freeze the pipes this week," he adds, a little too cheerfully. "Could make for a dramatic Sunday bath." There's that word again, bath. You exchange glances with your sister. If the pipes do freeze, it means the tin hip baths will be dragged out and filled kettle by kettle from the hearth. A process so long and undignified, it becomes a public act even when done in private. That's for another day, though. Right now, there's only this room, this fire, and the ritual of taking turns pretending not to care where you sit. Your grandmother clears her throat. Everyone freezes. She slowly, meaningfully lowers her teacup to its saucer and stands. Slowly, creaking like an old floorboard. The room watches in reverent silence. She shuffles toward the hallway without a word. The chair is empty. Your father isn't back yet. Your uncle is momentarily distracted by the cat, now attempting to claw a loose thread on his sock. There's a 2-second window of opportunity. 3 at most. You rise, not too quickly. That would be gauche. But with confidence, as if it's the most natural motion in the world. You glide toward the chair and lower yourself with all the grace of a swan, alighting on a pond, arranging your skirt and gloved hands with military precision. You feel it the instant you sit, the radiant heat soaking through the cushion, the warmth curling around your spine like a secret. No one says a word. No one needs to. You've done it properly. No breaches. No raised eyebrows. And for the first time today, you feel warmth not just on your skin, but in your bones. A victory. The fire pops approvingly. You glance toward the window, where snow begins to drift past in lazy spirals. Outside, the world is frozen stiff, but inside you found your place, just for now, until someone more senior returns. You're summoned next to the upstairs dressing room, where the true theatre of winter status begins, getting dressed. Not merely for function, and certainly not for comfort, but for image, propriety, and that ever-present spectre called correctness. You stand still in your petticoat, arms half raised, while your maid lays out the day's layers like a general setting the battlefield. First, the flannel undershift. Scratchy, yes, but invisible. Then the chemise. Then the stays. Tug snugly until your ribs protest. That's the foundation. Now comes the layering. Layer upon layer of cloth. Button, lace, and wool. Each telling a story not just of warmth, but of wealth. You either pile with quiet dread. A sensible winter ensemble in Victorian England means at least 5 main layers from shoulder to shoe. The phrase dressed to the nines may as well have been invented for this ritual. Every item must correspond to your social station, your family's fortunes, and your personal decency, all while pretending you just happen to throw it on. Your outermost dress is a sturdy slate grey, with a modest bustle and full sleeves lined in fox trim, a hand-me-down from your aunt, and just enough fur to suggest we're not destitute yet. Over it goes a thick woolen mantle, dyed deep bottle green, then gloves, then a bonnet, which must sit at exactly the correct angle or risk making you look like a country cousin. Finally the boots, lined in felt, buttoned up the side, hideously stiff. You've heard of one girl who wore unlaced boots and fainted at the bakery from cold and shame. You wonder sometimes if it's apocryphal, but you're not willing to find out. The thing is, in this world, dressing is a language. The cut of your sleeve, the texture of your gloves, the tiny velvet ribbon at your throat, all speak fluently of where you belong, or worse, where you pretend to. Girl in last year's fashions might as well wear a placard that reads social decline pending. You remember last month's visit to the Addlestons, when Mrs. Addleston wore a velvet walking dress indoors. Your mother whispered afterward, "If you need to wear velvet to stay warm, perhaps stay in bed. The rules are tight as corset stays, and just as punishing." Your maid, to her credit, says nothing about the fading hem or the mended glove lining. She has her own code to follow. Neat hair, bowed head, no commentary unless asked directly. She helps pin your collar in place, then steps back. "You're ready, miss." You nod, even though you feel like a wool-stuffed mannequin. But now comes the truly important part, the reveal. Descending into public view while fully dressed is like stepping onto a stage. You pause at the top of the staircase, take a steadying breath, and glide downward, praying your boots don't squeak. In the drawing room, your family looks up, briefly. No compliments, of course. This isn't a ball. But someone's eyes linger half a second too long on your mantle, and you feel the flicker of satisfaction. Message received. You're warm enough, presentable enough, for today. You take your seat near the side window, still not fire adjacent, but at least out of the worst of the drafts, and begin the next test of winter etiquette, endurance without fidgeting. The wool is already prickling at your wrists, the stays press a dull ache against your ribs, and your boots are beginning their slow assault on your ankles. But to adjust any of it openly would be a failure. Shifting in your seat implies discomfort. Discomfort implies poor breeding. And that, well, that's practically a scandal. Across the room, your cousin Agatha enters in a maroon woolen gown with ivory piping and fur cuffs. She's made a bold move today. No shawl. You can feel the ripple of attention. No one says it loud, but everyone's wondering the same thing. Is her parlour better heated, or is this simply vanity dressed in bravery? Your aunt eyes her up and down, then returns to her embroidery with the cold precision of someone who'll be mentioning it in a letter by nightfall. Agatha removes her gloves slowly. The inside lining peeks out, satin, a quiet luxury. She places them palm up on the side table, an elegant gesture only achievable through endless practice. The gloves are not damp, which suggests her carriage was warmed before arrival. You take note. Everyone does. You smooth your skirt. Not too quickly, not too often. It's moments like this you realise winter clothing in your world is a type of armour, but not for war, for witnessing. You're seen before you are spoken to, evaluated before you are heard. And nowhere is this truer than in the dreaded act of removal. To remove a glove, a bonnet, even a single pin from your shawl must be done with timing and poise. Remove too early, and you're seen as impulsive. Remove too late, and you're gauche, making everyone else uncomfortable by holding onto your outer garments as if you might flee at any moment. The proper moment to unbutton your mantle, somewhere between the second and third cup of tea, when at least one other woman has done so first, and even then, never fully. A half-open mantle shows you're both relaxed and restrained. It's a language of fabric and hesitation. You recall an older girl years ago who arrived at a gathering and removed her overskirt before her gloves. The room went silent. An older gentleman coughed. Someone dropped a spoon. The hostess, smiling too hard, simply said, "How bracingly continental." That girl was never quite invited back. And so here you sit, radiating polite stillness in 5 pounds of textile. The fireplace flickers, and you resist the urge to extend your foot forward even an inch. Across the room, your brother does exactly that. He's a boy. The rules coddle him. He might even remove his cravat and receive nothing worse than a fond eye roll. You, however, must remain perfect and warm, but not too warm. Sweating is vulgar. Shivering is weak. The only acceptable body temperature is serene. You shift your gaze to the frost on the window, where a tiny track left by someone's fingertip spells out a secret. Probably the cook's son. He has no gloves, but the freedom to write on windows. You envy that, just a little. The door creaks. Tea is being prepared. You inhale slowly and prepare to sit another hour, dressed not only in wool, but in performance. Because in Victorian winter etiquette, how you wear your warmth is more revealing than what you say. And the moment you forget that, well, remember the velvet-wearing Mrs. Addleston. She's still recovering. You've been summoned to join a short outing, just a walk to the market and back, your aunt insists, as if the street outside isn't coated in betrayal. You pull your gloves back on with the ceremonial patience of someone preparing for battle, then step outside into the crisp, soul-pinching air of a Victorian winter street. The first thing to note is that the ice doesn't care about your composure. The stone steps are slick, the cobbles uneven, and the gutter has frozen into a narrow trench of black glass. You tighten your shawl and step gingerly, aware that your every movement is being watched. Not by your family, but by the neighbours. From behind lace curtains and slightly open shutters, they peer out with the silent curiosity of people who gauge your worth by how you walk across a frosty pavement. Slipping is not just dangerous, it's undignified. To stumble in public is to invite commentary. Even if no one says anything to your face, you'll hear of it by the following afternoon. Did you hear? The young miss from number 14 nearly toppled into the fishmonger's cart. Poor dear, must be nerves. No one will mention the ice, just your ankles. You recall your cousin Beatrice, who once caught her heel on a loose cobble and fell straight onto her bustle. The bruise lasted a week. The shame, 3 seasons. Her mother still claims she had a fainting spell, but everyone knows the truth. After all, word travels faster than frost. Your own boots click against the stone with deliberate care. You've practiced this pace, the walk that balances grace and grip. Too slow and you look timid. Too fast and you risk a scandalous slip. So you glide, or at least try to, with one hand gently grazing your aunt's arm, as both a show of support and a quiet anchor. Around you, the streets have taken on their winter form. Milkmen crunch through slush with splintered yolks. A sweet boy tips his hat with a smile, revealing cheeks chapped into leather. Horses snort clouds of vapour that linger like ghosts between buildings. Even the lamp-posts seem to shiver in place. Your aunt begins one of her running commentaries. Don't look at that butcher's stall. Too vulgar. Oh, that boy's coat is too short for decent folk. Poor upbringing, no doubt. And that woman, crossing without a chaperone, she clicks her tongue. Brave or brazen? Hard to tell these days. You nod at all the right moments, half listening, but your attention is on the cobblestones. One misstep, and you'll be immortalised in someone else's tea gossip. You've heard the stories. Mrs. Bramble, who cracked her wrist outside the bakery and was henceforth known as Wobbly Bramble. Mr. Davies, who slipped while bowing and tore his trousers. He moved to Bath shortly after. Coincidence? Doubtful. A carriage rumbles by, its wheels kicking up chunks of frozen mud. You step aside just in time to avoid a splash that would have marked you for days. Your aunt nods, approvingly, as if dodging a cartwheel is a natural extension of breeding. You pass a newsboy hawking headlines with red fingers and frostbitten lips. Freezing fog! River impassable! 2 ladies fell in Limehouse Lane, he crows. Your aunt tuts, not at the news, but at the newsboy's volume. You adjust your scarf and glance upward. The sky is pale pewter, low and unmoving. You feel it pressing down, not oppressively, but with authority, like the season itself is watching to see if you falter. You won't. Not here. Not in full view. The market appears through the mist like a mirage made of bricks, baskets, and breath. Even in winter it pulses with quiet tension. Stalls groan under the weight of root vegetables and salted fish. Baskets of withered apples cluster together like they're conserving heat. And everywhere, people move in the slow, layered shuffle of survival. You and your aunt approach the linen vendor first. She greets the stallkeeper with a nod so slight you almost miss it. They exchange no more than a few murmured words, but an entire hierarchy plays out in their silence. Your aunt receives the finer cloth. Better dye, tighter weave. A woman beside you with red-chapped hands and no bonnet is handed coarser stock. She says nothing, but you see her fingers tighten around the fabric. Winter doesn't just strip trees, it strips pride. You trail behind your aunt, gloves tucked and posture perfect, careful to make no eye contact with the coal porter stacking bags nearby. He smells of ash and desperation. Not that you'd ever say so aloud, but your aunt's sudden interest in the dried lavender tells you she's noticed too, and is choosing to notice something else instead. Then comes the real test. A patch of melted snow spans the alley between the vegetable carts and the apothecary. The sun hasn't touched this side of the street in weeks. What lies beneath that slush is unknowable. A puddle? A pit? The collective shame of 1,000 careless steps. Your aunt glides across effortlessly. You, however, hesitate. And just as you lift your foot, a group of boys barrels past, laughing, jostling, and entirely immune to the unspoken rules. One of them kicks up a fan of slush that lands in a perfect arc on your hem. You freeze, literally and socially. It's not a large splash, just enough to darken the wool, leave a faint crescent of grime along the trim. But you know, it will be seen. The rules of winter etiquette say nothing about forgiveness, but everything about observation. Your aunt turns, her expression unreadable. She says nothing, but her eyes flick to your skirt and then to the boys, whose laughter is already echoing away. You murmur an apology for stepping too close to the curb. She nods once, curtly, then turns back to her shopping. The incident is over, but not forgotten. You spend the next few minutes wondering whether the stain will dry invisibly, or if someone at home will offer you the dreaded phrase, "No matter, it's only winter." That's the code for, it's your fault for not being careful. On your way back, you pass two ladies you vaguely recognise from church. They look impeccable. Lace collars starched to defy the fog, boots polished like obsidian. They nod at your aunt and glance at you. One of them lingers just a half-second too long on your skirt. You manage a smile, tilt your chin upward, pretend you don't feel the cold dampness against your shin. As you near home, the wind shifts, picking up old snow from rooftops and flinging it across your path like powdered judgment. You and your aunt step inside the front door, shake off the cold in silence. She hands her bonnet to the maid, then turns to you. "Next time," she says softly, "choose the right-hand side of the lane." That's it. No reprimand, no sigh, no lecture. But you hear it all. Because winter in Victorian society isn't just about frostbite and coal. It's about knowing where to walk, when to speak, and how to wear a ruined hem like it never happened. Back inside, you retreat to the breakfast room, a misnomer since no one actually eats there past 9 o'clock. But the fire still smoulders faintly, and you're allowed to sit there during mid-morning hours as long as you don't make noise, mess, or, heaven forbid, heat a kettle uninvited. You perch on the bench furthest from the window, letting your skirts dry under layers of social restraint and residual coal heat. The air smells faintly of yesterday's kippers, today's coal smoke, and the lingering invisible ghost of someone else's cologne. You peel off your gloves with quiet precision, noticing the stain on your skirt has already turned a dull crust at the hem. You resist the urge to brush it, and then you see it, your breath, still, inside the house. In summer, you take for granted that rooms hold warmth, but in winter, each chamber has its own climate, its own weak grasp on comfort. This room in particular, facing northeast with a stubborn draught along the skirting board, was never meant to be warm. Its job is to appear warm. The wallpaper, the heavy curtains, the brass trim on the fireplace, all designed to imply coziness, not deliver it. You sit stiffly, aware that others may enter at any moment. You must look composed, engaged in quiet reflection, perhaps while stirring a tepid cup of tea, or leafing through a volume of poetry without losing your place due to trembling fingers. The housemaid arrives with a tray. She says nothing, but you nod politely, acknowledging her without warmth. That's the rule. Politeness, but never familiarity. The tea is hot, but only just. You sip it carefully, more for the ritual than the relief. Your younger brother bursts into the room, hat askew, cheeks flushed from playing with the gardener's boy. He shakes snow from his coat like a wet dog, utterly immune to decorum. Your mother's voice echoes from the hallway before she even enters. "James, no snow inside the house." He freezes mid-shake. You watch with interest. Boys are allowed their moments of chaos, but only just. Your mother enters, swathed in a dressing gown and half-laced corset, clearly not yet prepared to see guests. Her cheeks are pink from the fire, or perhaps irritation, and her tone shifts the moment she sees you already seated, composed, and very nearly proper. "Good. You're here," she says. "We'll be receiving Mrs. Copeland shortly. Sit straighter, and cover that spot on your hem." Ah, yes. The stain. Still watching you. You reposition your shawl discreetly, just enough to hide the mark. Your mother gives a small approving nod, then turns to James. "Go change, and don't touch anything." He scampers off, leaving behind a trail of melting snow and the smell of winter mischief. Mrs. Copeland is a neighbour, and though you've never heard her say anything unkind, her eyebrows do more speaking than her lips. If she sees the stain, or worse, the slight tremble in your fingers, she'll mention it in passing to the milliner, who will mention it to the grocer's wife, who will in turn mention it while adjusting a price for your mother's ribbon. This is how frost travels in Victorian society, not just through the streets, but through whispers over jam jars and biscuit tins. You sip your tea and wait. Mrs. Copeland arrives precisely on time. Of course she does. No one fashionable is ever early, and only the desperate are late. You rise as she enters, curtsying just slightly, not too low, or she might think you're overly eager, not high and casual either, lest you seem dismissive. Just the right amount of politeness with precisely the right degree of spine. She's bundled in a velvet pelisse trimmed in what appears to be genuine sable. You feel the temperature in the room drop despite the fire. Behind her, her maid slips inside quietly with a parcel wrapped in oiled cloth and disappears down the corridor without acknowledgement. It's understood. Servants move like phantoms. Your mother, now fully composed and laced, offers her hand in greeting, which Mrs. Copeland accepts with gloved grace. Then come the pleasantries, so rehearsed and brittle they could shatter like a frozen pane. "Such a bracing morning," Mrs. Copeland offers, tugging at the fingers of her gloves one by one. "Indeed," replies your mother, "though warmer than yesterday, wouldn't you agree?" You wait. The moment is coming. Her eyes flick to you, briefly. A glance no longer than the snap of a twig, but thorough enough to register everything. Your boots, your gloves now resting properly in your lap, the carefully repinned shawl concealing the stained hem. She sees it all, and then she smiles. Only her mouth moves. Your daughter is looking, well, it's not a compliment, not quite. It's a probe, gently inserted into the conversation like the tip of a hat pin. Your mother thanks her with a pleasant murmur and turns the conversation to tea blends. You sit silently, nodding when expected, smiling when appropriate, fingers curled in your lap like folded ribbons, but your mind is whirring. Because this is winter etiquette at its most refined, the art of social skirmish conducted over lukewarm tea and lukewarm smiles. The fire crackles, the china clinks, and somewhere beneath it all is the hum of judgment. Unspoken, polished, constant. You offer the biscuits when prompted, choosing the ginger ones safer. If someone so much as chips a tooth on a nut or makes a crumb on the carpet, it'll be recounted for weeks. Mrs. Copeland declines, citing the weather. "I never eat sweets when it's damp. The body slows." The way she says the body suggests other people's bodies, certainly not hers. Eventually the visit ends. She departs with a flourish of her muff and a final glance over her shoulder, right at you, a flicker of something, approval, pity, amusement, it doesn't matter. It's gone in an instant. Your mother exhales the moment the door shuts. Not a sigh. Victorian women never sigh, but a breath just deep enough to suggest relief. "Well done," she says softly without turning. "You held yourself well." You nod, quietly pleased. In the cold chess game of drawing room survival, you've escaped today without a social bruise. The hem is still damp beneath the shawl, but your dignity remains starched and upright. As the fire settles into coals and the clink of cups fades, you realise something important. In winter, it's not just your body that must be kept warm, it's your reputation, and the temperature of both is always being measured. The day drags on, and the light outside dims into that curious half-shadow particular to a Victorian winter afternoon, where it's not quite evening, not quite day, and everything is tinted the colour of old pewter. You're called to the sitting room to help with correspondence, which in this house is code for watch your elders write letters while maintaining good posture and not speaking unless spoken to. The fire has gone down again, of course. Coal isn't to be wasted. The embers are banked, the heat barely a whisper. You settle near the writing desk and accept the stack of envelopes handed to you, unsealed, cream-coloured, thick with weight and intent. Your job is simple. Fold, blot, stack, but never seal. That would be presumptuous. Your mother is already writing her fourth letter of the afternoon. You can tell from her expression that it is the one to Aunt Celia. The tone must be warm but not too warm, apologetic without implying guilt, concerned but not intrusive. Letter writing in this world is a high form of choreography, and then it happens. The chimney groans, a deep, almost conversational sigh of soot and air that everyone in the room pretends not to notice. But your heart sinks because you've heard that sound before, and you know what's coming next. It begins with a flutter of black snow, just a pinch, like confetti tossed at a very dull wedding. Then more, drifting lazily down from the hearth as the warm updraft falters. You glance at the fire and see it, the dreaded backdraft. The chimney is sulking again. Your mother pauses mid-sentence, not because she's startled, heavens no, but because the rules say that if soot is falling, one must pretend it is not. Only if it lands directly on your paper may you acknowledge it, and even then, only with the faintest flick of the wrist. A small mound collects in the fireplace. Your sister discreetly rises to fetch the screen, one of those lovely painted ones with birds and flowers, utterly useless at blocking soot but essential for preserving appearances. She places it in front of the hearth. It wobbles slightly, then leans. The smudge of ash on the rug is beginning to widen, but still no one says anything. You are, instead, handed a fresh stack of blank parchment. You've heard, of course, of the incident last year at the Crenshaws. A chimney sweep showed up late, and Lady Crenshaw's new carpets were ruined by a gust of flue ash. She tried to host an afternoon tea the next week, and not a soul came. Something about the air in that house feels unsettled. Your father finally enters, notices the fireplace and raises a brow. Still acting up? Your mother glances at the screen. Only slightly. That, in Victorian terms, is practically a confession of disaster. A servant is dispatched to call the sweep. This means he'll be arriving tomorrow just after dawn, and will track Ash through the hallway, clatter about with brushes, and, most terrifying of all, speak out loud. He's one of the few men in London permitted to call soot and not residue, and that makes him dangerous. In the meantime, the room cools further. The fire cannot be tended until the flue is clear, and so your entire afternoon is now a test of resolve, finishing correspondence without letting your hands tremble, ignoring the faint scent of ash curling through your skirts, and trying very hard not to sneeze. Because sneezing, especially due to soot, is unladylike. The sweep arrives the next morning while the sky's still more night than day, a smudge of blue-grey barely peeling off the rooftops. You hear him before you see him, clattering metal rods, boots like hammers, and a low whistle that cuts through the cold like a blade through wax. You're not supposed to be in the hallway when he enters. but you linger behind the parlour door just long enough to catch a glimpse. He's small, no more than 15, perhaps younger, his face completely blackened with soot except for 2 piercing eyes. He carries his tools like a knight wields a lance, and for a moment he looks both older and more alive than anyone in your household. The housemaid guides him in with a kind of sideways reverence, the same way she'd escort the coffin maker or the rat catcher, people whose jobs are vital but must not be seen too clearly. He disappears into the hearth like a magician's trick. You hear the scratch of his brush in the chimney flue, the scatter of grit onto the iron grate, and somewhere upstairs, a soft groan of dislodged soot trickling downward like dark snow. You're shuffled away before he re-emerges because it would be unseemly to watch. He's paid in coin and dismissed with a hasty slice of bread wrapped in cloth. No one offers tea, no one says thank you. He leaves as silently as he came, trailing a single black fingerprint along the back door latch. Back in the sitting room, the fire is restored to good health, crackling, assertive, even a little smug. But now the etiquette shifts again. You see, once the chimney has been swept, the ash must not be acknowledged. Not the faint cloud still hovering near the baseboards, not the black smear clinging to the poker. Cleanliness must be assumed. To mention soot is to imply that something soiled your home, and Victorian respectability is not compatible with the idea that dirt, much less coal dirt, might exist indoors. This unwritten rule leads to curious behaviours. Your aunt once spilled ash across the parlour carpet during a particularly enthusiastic bout of fire tending. Rather than fetch the maid, she covered it with a large fern until evening. When the fern was removed, the stain remained, but so did the silence. It's still there, faint and shadowed, like a memory no one will claim. In your own home, the soot is handled wordlessly. A folded cloth appears, a small broom is employed. No one speaks. The maid coughs into her sleeve, an innocent cough, but one that risks crossing into vulgarity. You hear it and feel a twinge of guilt. She's probably colder than any of you, fingers red and raw, knuckles grey with coal dust. But etiquette forbids pity when it requires discretion. Kindness, perhaps, but not visible emotion. Certainly not comfort. Later that afternoon, the drawing room is pronounced settled. The fire burns evenly, no longer rebelling. Tea is poured, letters are resumed, and though the faint scent of soot still clings to the drapes, no one remarks on it. But you remember the boy, the flash of his eyes, the way he vanished into the hearth like he belonged to the brickwork. You wonder if he works every house on this street, if he knows which families tip well, if he dreams of warmth, or if it's so unfamiliar that he's stopped noticing its absence. You place your glove back on your lap and pick up your pen. You write your name in perfect copperplate, the letters clean and symmetrical on the page. Because in this house, neatness is more important than comfort, and winter, no matter how much soot it brings, must always be endured with grace. You wake the next morning to an odd quiet, a muffled stillness that presses against the windows like a held breath. It takes a moment to realise what's different. Then you see it. Snow. Thick, soft, and blanketing the world in a hushed coat of white. The streets, the rooftops, even the coal cart outside, all blurred into a single pale sheet, like someone scraped away the city's soot and left behind a blank page. And that means only one thing. The Thames has frozen. You hear the news from your cousin, who bursts into the breakfast room half-laced, half-dressed, and wholly improper. They're building booths on the ice already, he grins, crumbs flying from his mouth. Father says we may go before noon. Your mother looks up from her paper, raising a sceptical brow. If the frost holds, she replies, as if the river's freeze were an unreliable but charming suitor. But inside, everyone's already buzzing. The Frost Fair, when the river turns into a market, a circus, a playground, and a minefield of etiquette traps all rolled into one, is both thrilling and terrifying. It's a once-in-a-generation spectacle, and everyone who's anyone will be there. Preparations begin immediately. By 10 o'clock, the entire household is a flurry of layered garments, fur-lined cloaks, carriage requests, and carefully packed parcels of tea cakes and oranges wrapped in waxed cloth. No one speaks aloud what they're all thinking. Please don't fall in. The river is frozen, yes, but only in places. There are still dark patches where water gleams beneath the ice, like eyes waiting to blink. You're laced tightly into your best walking gown, charcoal with silver buttons, chosen for both warmth and contrast against the snow. Your boots are polished. Your muff has been discreetly lined with hot bricks wrapped in flannel. You're ready. The carriage ride down is slow. Everyone in London seems to have the same idea. Horses tread cautiously, their hooves muffled against the packed snow. You pass a line of men hauling barrels, women with arms full of bread loaves, children pulling sledges made from wooden crates and rope. It's a strange procession, like a cheerful migration across some frozen kingdom. And then you see it. The river, wide and white, stretched flat like a ballroom floor. The arches of the bridges loom above, but below, where water should churn, there is only ice dotted with tents, booths, and fluttering pennants. Smoke rises in lazy curls from tiny fires. Laughter carries in pockets on the wind. Someone is playing a fiddle. A dog chases a spinning hoop. The Frost Fair has begun. You step down from the carriage, your foot crunching onto the river's back. A shiver crawls up your spine, not from cold, but awe. This is the Thames, and yet not. Solid, but fragile. A miracle of cold weather and collective denial. Because everyone knows the ice might not hold, but today it will. You link arms with your sister and begin walking. At once you're surrounded by movement. Ladies in heavy capes and flounced skirts. Gentlemen in tall hats trying to appear nonchalant on the slippery surface. Vendors shouting above the din. Someone is selling roasted chestnuts. Someone else is offering tiny ink sketches of your likeness. Drawn on the Thames, they call. Your sister stops to buy a blue ribbon that's been frozen stiff on its spool. Proof I was here, she says. You nod. Proof, and also protection. Because surviving a frost fair is as much about being seen as it is about staying dry. The deeper you wander onto the frozen Thames, the stranger the world becomes. A man in a velvet coat juggles oranges with frostbitten fingers. Nearby, a barber is offering shaves on the ice beneath a hand-painted sign. His customer sitting atop an upturned barrel, a sheet wrapped loosely around his shoulders as though he weren't trembling from head to toe. Children race about, their laughter mingling with the crackle of firewood and the rhythmic thump of skates on ice. Somewhere to your left, someone's brought a printing press and is stamping souvenir cards with bold black letters. Bought on the Thames, January 14th, 1855. You wonder how many of these people actually feel their fingers anymore. Your sister pulls you toward a vendor hawking sugared almonds, and you both share a small bag between you, crunching them slowly as your breath fogs the air. The sweetness is sharp against the cold. A woman in green nearly collides with you, her feet skittering briefly, but she catches herself with a laugh and a graceful pivot, regaining her posture just in time to preserve her reputation. That's the trick, isn't it? No matter how slippery the surface, you must always appear in control. You recall Lady Wiltham's infamous tumble at the last Frost Fair, when her hoop skirt flipped like a bell and revealed both ankles, and her scandalously undecorated petticoats. The incident was the talk of the season. She left for Bath for her health, and returned with a new wardrobe and a conveniently rebranded memory. The same rules apply here. If you stumble, make it seem like a dance. If you fall, rise laughing, gracefully. And if your foot plunges through a thin patch of ice, do your best to pretend the water in your boot is merely refreshing. Your own steps remain steady for now, but the air is sharp against your cheeks, and the surface beneath your feet shifts ever so slightly. You feel it. Not movement exactly, but a kind of flex, like the river is breathing below you. It reminds you that the frost is not your friend. It is a visitor just like you, and not one to overstay its welcome. You pass a booth lined with charms, pressed tin hearts, copper thimbles, miniature shoes, and notice an elderly woman hunched behind it, her shawl damp with melting snow. She eyes you carefully. "Something to keep you steady?" she asks, her voice a mix of smoke and old secrets. You smile, politely in decline, but your sister lingers. She fingers a silver coin charm shaped like a boot sole and presses it into her palm. "For luck," she says. You don't mock her. You're beginning to feel the truth in her instinct. Ahead, your mother and aunt wave from a striped tent, already seated at a makeshift table with steaming cups of tea. You join them, grateful for the momentary shelter, and sit as elegantly as your half-frozen skirt will allow. The tea is too hot. It scalds your tongue, but you welcome it. Inside the tent the rules return, back straight, gloves on unless drinking, napkin in lap, not on knee. Even here, atop a frozen river, the choreography continues. A loud crack echoes from somewhere far behind you. Everyone freezes. Not the river, just the people. Conversations pause, laughter dies down. You all wait, breath held. Then a gull shrieks overhead, and someone coughs. A new tune starts on the fiddle. The moment passes. But the chill that runs down your spine has little to do with the temperature. You sip your tea and glance around. No one mentions the sound. To speak of danger is to invite it, because the frost fair may be festive, but beneath your feet the river waits, and every good Victorian knows it's rude to outstay a miracle. You return from the frost fair in the early afternoon, cheeks flushed and boots soaked through. The walk from the carriage to the house is short, but the cold has found the seam between your glove and your sleeve, and it sinks its teeth in. You keep your spine straight, of course. The front step is no place for grimacing. Once inside, you peel off your outer garments in layers. Shawl, mantle, muff, overskirt. Everything damp, everything faintly stained with smoke or sugar. The maid takes your boots with a faint wince. One sole has started to come loose. She says nothing, but you know she's already thinking about how to dry them without cracking the leather. Your fingers are raw. Your jaw aches from forced smiles, and your gloves... Oh, your gloves are ruined. The stitching has pulled loose at the base of the thumb. You hold them up to the light, inspecting the damage with a mixture of dread and resignation. Because gloves, in Victorian winter society, are more than garments. They are statements, and yours are frayed. Gloves are a curious language. In public, they are armour. You wear them to shake hands, to open letters, to sit in a pew or sip tea or offer an elbow. They are the constant barrier between skin and scandal. A hand bare in the wrong context can imply desperation, illness, or, worse, forwardness. A gloveless hand on a gentleman's sleeve can tarnish a reputation quicker than a whispered rumour. You remember your mother's words. Only two types of women go without gloves in winter, peasants and fools, and you are neither. This is why your gloves matter. Why the split seam feels like a split in your facade. Still, you can't dwell. The drawing room awaits. You pull on an older pair, black kid leather slightly creased, and descend the stairs with practised grace. Your sister joins you near the hearth, where a meagre fire glows behind the screen. She removes her gloves slowly, finger by finger, as though she were peeling back a secret. She places them neatly on the arm of the chair, palms down, fingers aligned. You match her, motion for motion. These little rituals are what hold the hour together. A moment later, your brother barges in from the garden, snowflakes melting across his coat, hands entirely bare. He flings his gloves onto the side table with all the subtlety of a cannonball. Your mother's head snaps around. "James," she says, "how many times must I remind you? Gloves are not to be tossed." He grins, oblivious, and bounds upstairs. You exchange a glance with your sister. Boys can afford such offences. Their futures are padded with expectation, not weighed with scrutiny. But for you, every gesture is measured. You recall a story passed down from your grandmother about a young lady at a winter recital who dropped one glove in the foyer and returned 5 minutes later to find it pinched by the minister's wife. The lady was branded careless, or perhaps flirtatious. The truth didn't matter, only the impression. You flex your fingers in the kid leather, letting them rest lightly on your lap. The gloves are warm now, shaped to you. But the reminder lingers. Winter etiquette isn't just about being cold. It's about who's allowed to show it, and who must hide it beneath soft, well-seamed leather. Evening settles with its usual quiet authority, draping the parlour in a veil of lamplight and long shadows. The fire crackles politely, now monitored closely after yesterday's soot misadventure, and everyone takes their appointed seats. The windows are fogged from within, and outside gaslight flickers through the frost like distant stars blurred by sleep. This is the hour for polite company, for reading aloud, for the kind of idle conversation that masks 100 layers of observation. But more than that, this is the hour of the ungloved hand. Not entirely bare, of course. You'd never sit with uncovered fingers unless in the most intimate of settings. But here, in the safe confines of family and trusted friends, gloves are allowed to be loosened, removed even, gently, slowly. One finger at a time, never all at once, always with a purpose. You unfasten yours with deliberate care, thumb first, then forefinger, always in order. You place them, palms down, on the table beside your tea. If someone saw you now, your hands clean, your nails rounded but modest, your skin pale from the winter sun, it would say exactly what you needed it to say. She is well kept, well trained, and worthy of consideration. Because gloves are more than a barrier against the cold. They're a filter between self and society. A young woman's gloved hand says, "I know the rules." An ungloved hand says, "I trust you." And sometimes, just sometimes, it says something even more dangerous. There's a memory that rises with the steam of your tea. A few winters ago, during an impromptu gathering after church, you'd been seated beside a young gentleman from Cambridge. He was clever, too clever, probably. And while everyone discussed poetry and railway expansion, he leaned in slightly, looked at your gloves and said, "Do you ever take those off, or are you always on duty?" You remember laughing. You remember unfastening one glove, just the one, slowly. And you remember the look on his face, amused, surprised, slightly alarmed. You hadn't touched him. You hadn't said anything improper. But the message had been clear enough. You still think about that moment sometimes, especially now, as you sit in a room full of firelight and formalities, where even a cough must be stifled in a handkerchief embroidered with initials. Your sister, across from you, is darning a glove. Not hers, of course. She claims her stitching isn't fine enough. These belong to the vicar's daughter, sent over discreetly in a bundle of mending. The seam had frayed at the wrist, a scandalous little tear, probably from hurried removal, or worse. careless affection. Your sister doesn't comment, but she threads the needle with a kind of solemn pride. Outside, you hear the distant clang of a horse-drawn delivery cart on icy cobbles. The sound reminds you that the world beyond the windows is still sharp, still frozen, still watching. The gloves will go back on before anyone leaves the house, the moment you stand, in fact, even if it's only to pass through the hall, because ungloved hands belong to moments, private ones, quiet ones, and in a world of constant performance, they are your most subtle form of rebellion. You flex your fingers once, feeling the air against your skin. Then you slip the gloves back on, soft, practiced, smooth. No one notices, but someone always does. The morning after, the frost fair has left behind a different kind of chill, not in your bones, but in your obligations. Your mother hands you a thin stack of visiting cards over breakfast. "We must call on the Marshams this afternoon," she says, as though you'd volunteered. "And the Fletchers, if the weather holds. They've installed a new carriage canopy. It would be rude not to notice." You nod, dutiful but hollow. Winter visits are the most grueling of all social rituals, calling on neighbours when the roads are iced, when the wind cuts through 4 layers of wool, and when the tea is almost always lukewarm and served in cups too delicate for trembling hands. It's a performance wrapped in frost. But you prepare. The rules are precise. Gloves on, cloak buttoned, bonnet tied tight. Calling cards slipped into your muff where they won't curl from moisture or lose their edge. You ride in the carriage with your sister, neither of you speaking much. There's nothing to say. You both know how this will go. The first stop, the Marshams. Their street is lined with frozen gutter channels that gleam like silver knives. The front step has been dusted with sawdust, which crunches underfoot. A servant opens the door precisely 12 seconds after the bell is pulled. Quick enough to imply readiness, but not so fast as to seem idle. You enter into a hall so cold your breath bounces off the wallpaper. "Mrs. Marsham will receive you in the blue room," the footman says, already turning. Of course she will. The blue room, never warmed properly, chosen precisely because guests won't linger. You peel off your outer cloak, but keep your gloves on. It's far too early in the visit to remove them. Removing gloves is an act of intimacy, even among women, and today's visit is purely strategic. Mrs. Marsham greets you with her usual frozen smile politeness. Her gown is navy bombazine with white cuffs that have never met a real fireplace. The 3 of you sit in a triangle of tension around a tea table that steams weakly. You're offered a cup. You accept, even though it smells faintly of boiled wool and lemon. You sip. It burns your tongue slightly. You say nothing. The conversation begins. "I do hope the frost fair didn't disturb your sleep," Mrs. Marsham says, her eyes twinkling with a sort of amusement that masks appraisal. "We heard the noise from here. Some of the music was quite enthusiastic." You smile. "We were home before sunset." Your sister adds, "It was quite a sight. I believe I saw someone offering wax figures of the Queen." "Oh dear," Mrs. Marsham replies. "The monarchy for sale?" Everyone chuckles. It's a joke, but not entirely. Then comes the subtle war. She glances at your boots, still faintly damp at the soles. At your gloves, a thread just beginning to loosen at the wrist. At your tea saucer, where a single drop has escaped your cup and lingered on the porcelain like an accusation. You shift slightly, enough to imply dignity but not discomfort. And when she asks, "Have you heard about poor Mrs. Denby's slip on the ice?" you respond with the perfect mix of concern and detachment. "Oh no, how dreadful. I do hope she wasn't seriously inconvenienced." Because in these visits, sympathy must never imply identification. You must express sorrow without suggesting it could ever happen to you. You leave the Marshams with cheeks pink from more than the cold. The moment the carriage door clicks shut, you exhale. She saw the loose thread, your sister says flatly. You don't answer. Of course she did. That was the entire purpose of her gaze. Searching, cataloguing, filing you away under whatever quiet label she chooses. Tolerable, tired, slipping, still respectable, for now. The carriage bumps down the icy street toward your next appointment, the Fletchers. Their home is smaller, but somehow colder. The drawing room has a single fire that seems more ceremonial than functional, and a fan of frost creeps up the inside of the window like lace woven by ghosts. You enter with your gloves still on, exchanging greetings with Mrs. Fletcher, a tall woman who speaks with an accent that shifts depending on her audience. Today she sounds faintly Scottish, perhaps to match her wool tartan shawl, which clashes magnificently with the pink damask upholstery. The real challenge here, though, is the tea. The Fletchers pride themselves on serving exotic blends, green teas, oolongs, and even a horrifying smoked variety from Russia that tastes like chimney water and regret. You accept your cup with a smile so stiff it could be carved from soapstone and sip cautiously, letting the liquid barely touch your tongue. It's awful. Your sister manages better. She compliments the flavour, somehow keeping a straight face. You make a vague sound of agreement, the sort that could be interpreted as delight or mild indigestion. Then the topic shifts to fashion, dangerous territory. Mrs. Fletcher gestures toward your sister's gloves. Those are charming. Did you have them dyed locally? You glance sideways. This is a test. Actually, your sister replies, they were a gift from our cousin in Bath. The dye is softer there. Mrs. Fletcher nods slowly. Of course. So many colours look garish in this light. You want to laugh, but you don't. No one in this room would survive an actual compliment. Every sentence is a riddle, a deflection, a folded napkin hiding a sharp fork. The visit draws to a close with the ritual of calling card exchange. Your mother always said, a calling card is not an invitation, it's a performance. It says, I was here, I noticed you, and I require nothing in return except acknowledgement. You place yours with care on the silver tray, angled, never stacked, name side up, no smudges. And now comes the final layer of etiquette, the exit. You stand, rewrap your scarf and retrieve your gloves. But here's the trick. Gloves must be redonned after you've reached the hall but before you touch the door. Timing is everything. To pull them on too soon looks eager, too late, and you appear unpracticed. You aim for that perfect moment, between the maid's bow and the latch's click, and slide your hand back into its kid leather shell like you've done it 1,000 times. Because you have. The door opens. The wind stings your face. The world outside is still white, still watching. Inside the carriage again, your sister finally speaks. She mentioned my gloves on purpose. You nod. And you passed. She looks relieved. So did you. You both sit in silence for a moment, watching the fog gather on the window, the silhouettes of chimney pots flickering past like crooked teeth. Calling in winter isn't about conversation. It's about surviving the scrutiny without ever letting anyone see you sweat, or worse, shiver. The evening draws near, and so does the coughing. It begins quietly, just a single, muffled sound from somewhere upstairs. Then another from the maid as she returns from the laundry with flushed cheeks and a sheen of damp across her brow. You glance at your sister, but she avoids your gaze. Everyone hears it. No one comments. Because in a Victorian household, illness must be handled delicately. A loud cough is not merely a sign of chill, it's a disruption, a threat to the calm choreography of the home. And in winter, when the air is thick with coal smoke and breath curls visibly indoors, illness is inevitable. But admitting it, That's another matter entirely. You retire to the sitting room, where the fire is cracking politely and the air smells faintly of lemon oil and starch. Your aunt sits with a shawl around her shoulders and a small square of linen at her lips. "The damp, that's all," she says, though no one asked. "A bit of dust in the curtains." She says this every winter. The etiquette surrounding sickness is intricate and exhausting. To acknowledge your own cold is attention-seeking. To acknowledge someone else's is presumptuous. You must walk the line between compassion and intrusion, between concern and impropriety. Your mother, for instance, has perfected the art of winter nursing. Not through medicine, heavens no, but through ritual. Camphor rubbed discreetly into the bedsheets, eucalyptus tucked into folded handkerchiefs, teaspoons of honey delivered without comment to anyone who clears their throat twice in 1 hour. But never, ever spoken aloud. Once your cousin's governess had the audacity to declare she had influenza. Not a chill, not a fatigue, but influenza. She was dismissed within the week. "It's not that she was ill," your aunt had whispered. "It's that she said so." You clear your own throat softly, then feel a wave of guilt. 3 clears in under a minute is suspicious. You sip tea, though it's gone cold, just to give your hand something to do. Across the room, your grandmother dozes in a chair, her breath wheezing slightly through her lips. No one wakes her. If she's ill, it's simply part of the season. She has survived 6 London winters, 3 waves of bronchitis, and at least 1 maid who swore the house was cursed with draught ghosts. She'll survive this too. The sound of coughing returns, this time from the scullery. The maid appears a moment later with a tray, her eyes slightly glassy, her hands trembling as she pours the tea. You watch her wrists, raw, red, cracked from soap and cold. She's trying so hard not to sniffle. The tray rattles ever so slightly as she sets it down. No one says a word. You wonder if she has family, if she sends letters home, if they know that when you're sick in service you work twice as hard to appear half as ill. There's no protocol for a coughing maid, not one that involves rest, only replacement. Your sister slips a folded handkerchief onto the tray before the maid turns. It's monogrammed, soft, still warm. The maid pauses. She doesn't speak, just lowers her eyes, takes the tray and leaves. That night, when you dress for bed in the freezing upstairs chamber, you pause at your basin. You cough, once, twice. The mirror fogs from your breath, and you say nothing. You lie in bed, wrapped in layers of flannel wool, and 1 slightly questionable hot brick bundled in an old tea towel at your feet. The window rattles as the wind sighs down the alley. Somewhere in the dark a coal wagon creaks past, its driver shouting into the void like a ghost calling home. And still, more coughing, this time from the room next door. You know the sound. It's your sister. Short, dry bursts, not yet serious but rhythmic, predictable. She too says nothing. You remember a winter 3 years ago, when your cousin Mary took to bed for 6 days with what everyone pretended was exhaustion. The doctor was summoned, but not during daylight hours. He arrived at 10 in the evening and left through the scullery entrance. His bill was folded into a tin and never spoken of again. Mary recovered. Mostly. She's pale even in summer now. The rules of sickness are not about medicine. They are about narrative. You can be tired, but not ill. Resting, but never bedridden. If you must faint, do it in church, never at home, and never near a gentleman. That's how reputations fade, not in scandal, but in sniffles. A knock at your door, soft, hesitant. You rise, draped in a shawl, and crack it open. It's your sister, bundled in a blanket. Her cheeks flushed, a glimmer of desperation in her eyes. "I'm cold," she says quietly. You don't ask why she didn't ring for the maid. You already know. To call attention to oneself is to invite judgment. But between sisters there's a truce. You let her in, usher her toward your bed, and together you build a cocoon of warmth and silence. The hot brick is shifted between you. You both pretend it still has heat left. She coughs again, muffled into your sleeve. "I won't tell," you whisper. She nods. "Neither will I." This too is winter etiquette, the quiet pact of shared discomfort, masked beneath quilts and civility. You each know what's expected in the morning. Bright eyes, steady steps, no visible fatigue. If either of you falters, the other will smooth the truth like starch across a collar. The next day she rises early, dresses well, and descends the stairs with her usual elegance. You follow. The drawing room is bright, falsely so. Everyone is present. No one mentions the circles beneath her eyes. But your mother passes her a cup of tea without asking, and your aunt insists the windows be shut, just for today. The maid, her cough now more persistent, is nowhere to be seen. You do not ask. Because the rules are clear. To care is allowed. To show it. That's the risk. Compassion is private. Kindness, whispered. Illness, above all, must never disturb the drawing room. You resume your embroidery. The fire pops, and someone changes the subject to the state of the canal. Your sister coughs just once more, and then not again. It's winter, and in this house, everyone is quietly unwell, and everyone is just fine. Downstairs, far from the parlour, beyond the edge of the family's well-tended quiet, the rules shift, but only slightly. You descend to the servants' level rarely, and when you do, it's like slipping behind the scenery of a play. The air is thicker, tinged with steam, coal, and boiled cabbage. The floors are bare, the walls marked from endless passing boots. It's colder here in a different way, no less biting, but somehow more honest. Today, you've been sent to fetch a hemmed garment from the laundry room, a task deemed too minor for a maid and too personal for a footman. You pass through the stone corridor quickly, ears filled with the sounds of scrubbing iron hiss and distant kitchen orders barked just above a whisper. In the scullery, two girls are bent over a pile of damp linens, arms red from the rinse water. Their sleeves are pushed up to the elbow, not proper, but necessary. You offer a nod. They curtsy in response, eyes lowered, cheeks flushed. Not from embarrassment, but from the heat of work and the cold of everything else. You're not expected to linger, but you do, because it's in these underlit corners that winter behaves differently. Here, etiquette doesn't mean which glove you remove first or how loudly you cough. It means not collapsing while lifting the coal scuttle. It means folding sheets with fingers that can't feel the edge. It means never, ever complaining about your boots, even if the soles have split and your stockings are wet by sunrise. You pause at the drying lines strung above the stove where socks, dozens of them, hang like surrender flags. A pair of your own is there, patched at the heel. You hope no one can tell. A young boy hurries past with an armful of firewood. He's no older than 10. His nose runs, but he doesn't stop to wipe it. There's ash on his cheek and something hollow in his eyes. He disappears through a swinging door without a sound. This is what it means to be warm down here. Always in motion, always aware. Stillness is a luxury reserved for those upstairs beside the fire, sipping oversteeped tea and performing discomfort like it's a parlour game. Below stairs, discomfort is the baseline. You find your garment, your half-repaired overskirt, folded neatly beside a bundle of linens. There's a note pinned to it, the handwriting awkward but earnest. Apologies for the singed hem. I have redone the panel. Warm wishes, E. You don't know who E is. You don't ask. You will say nothing, of course, when you wear the skirt again. Nothing about the stitching being just a touch uneven. Nothing about the thread being a slightly different shade. Because here, in this unheated corridor, you're reminded of something your governess once said, perhaps not intending to be overheard. Servants survive winter, gentlefolk weather it. You step back toward the stairs, overskirt in hand, heart slightly heavier than when you arrived. Behind you, someone coughs into a sleeve and is promptly ignored. Upstairs, the drawing room awaits, but before you return, you pause just inside the stairwell, holding your breath, listening. There is no music down here, no laughter, only heat from labour and silence worn like wool. Back upstairs, the contrast nearly knocks the breath from your lungs. It isn't warmer, not truly, but it feels like it should be. The walls are papered, the rugs thick, the furniture cushioned and obedient. The air smells faintly of lavender polish and the last dregs of rosewater. You return to your room to hang the overskirt, smoothing it gently along the wardrobe rail as though it had never been touched by soot or singe or the rough red hands of someone who works before dawn. A knock at the door. It's the housemaid, the younger one, the one with the always pinned cap and the eyes too tired for her age. She holds a tray, perfectly balanced, with a cup of broth and a folded linen napkin. "For your sister, miss," she says softly. You thank her. She bobs a quick curtsy, already turning away. "Is it true the other maid is unwell?" you ask before you can stop yourself. She hesitates. The silence stretches. Then, without looking back, she says, "She's resting, miss," and disappears down the corridor. Resting. That word again. You bring the tray to your sister's room. She's sitting in bed, back straight despite the flushed cheeks. She smiles faintly at the sight of you, then at the broth. "Smells like boiled paper," she murmurs, and you both laugh, careful not to wake the house. She dips her spoon in, slow and measured, never slurping, never too large a bite. Even illness must be consumed with grace. You sit beside her, watching the fire sputter in its grate. It was stoked earlier, probably by the same boy you passed downstairs. You wonder what room he sleeps in, if he sleeps at all. You imagine a narrow cot beside the coal bins, fingers chapped and blackened, dreams stained grey. "I've heard," your sister says, pausing between sips, "that in some houses the servants are allowed to boil potatoes in the fireplace." You glance at her. "Truly?" She shrugs, smiling. "Probably a myth, like warm laundry or proper wages." You both fall quiet. Then she adds, almost absently, "We live above them, but not apart from them, do we?" It's a dangerous thought, not in rebellion, but in honesty. And honesty is a cold draught in this house. Uncomfortable, unwelcome, hard to seal. You don't answer. You just sit a little closer. That night, as you prepare for bed, you hear the older maid coughing somewhere in the walls, not loud, not pleading. Just a soft, rhythmic sound, like someone tapping gently at a door that no one opens. And still, the fires are lit. The soup is served. The linen is mended. You wake early the next morning and find the hallway already swept, the hearth already warm, your boots cleaned of yesterday's soot. No one speaks of who did it. No one needs to, because beneath the manners and the mores and the mufflers, the entire house runs on the invisible choreography of hands that go unseen. And in winter, those hands move faster, work harder, and bleed more, just so everything above can remain quiet and clean. You put on your gloves and say nothing. Bathing in winter is not something you do. It's something you endure. You're summoned to the dressing room just after midday, when the sun is at its most pitiful, and the hearth has been coaxed into a sulky glow. The maid is already there, sleeves rolled, the tin hip bath centred like a sacrificial altar on the cold tiled floor. A kettle hisses beside her, and a second waits on the coals downstairs, preparing its long journey up the back stairs. There's no plumbing here, of course, not in a proper Victorian house. That sort of newfangled convenience is for hotels and invalids. Respectable families still bathe by basin, by kettle, and by sheer force of will. You shiver, and the maid pretends not to notice. She pours the first kettle into the bath. The steam rises like a ghost, momentarily fogging the small window. You step forward as if it's nothing, as if your toes aren't already recoiling in your boots, as if you want this. There are rules, of course. Baths are taken once a week, twice if there's a guest or a scandal. Hair is washed even less often, because drying it properly can take the better part of a day, and heaven forbid anyone see you with your hair hanging like a washerwoman. The water must be lukewarm, not hot, and poured carefully to avoid splashing. Steam, you've been told, is vulgar. It implies indulgence. You undress in silence, layer by layer. Each button is its own form of penance. You hand garments to the maid as you remove them. She folds them without looking. There's nothing lewd in this process, nothing intimate, just protocol, necessity. Once down to your shift, you step into the shallow water. It's warmer than you expect, barely. But the metal tub presses cold against your thighs, a quiet reminder that comfort is not the goal. Cleanliness is, decency is, discipline. The maid pours another kettle, eyes averted. You murmur a thank you, then she leaves. Not out of respect for your privacy, but to fetch the third kettle, and now you're alone. The bath is small, barely deep enough to cover your knees. You lift one leg, then the other, trying to distribute the heat. You scrub with a flannel and soft soap that smells faintly of lavender and more strongly of lye. Your breath curls in the air. Your arms goose prickle. There's a superstition among the servants that catching a chill while bathing is how weak lungs begin. Consumption doesn't come from God, it comes from cold water and foolishness. You rinse your limbs quickly, efficiently. The maid returns just in time for the final pour, one small kettle over your shoulders. The warmth makes you gasp, then it's gone. You step out as soon as the water stills. No lingering, that would be indulgent. You dry briskly with a rough towel, and the maid wraps you in a flannel robe with the tenderness of someone handling porcelain. No eye contact, no conversation. She carries the bath out by its handles, her small frame barely managing its weight. You hear her. Boots scuff the floor as she turns the corner, water sloshing gently as she disappears. Steam clings to the mirror, softening your reflection into a stranger. Pale arms, damp hair, and something else. Something brittle behind the eyes. You dress quickly. The fire is dimmed again, and the room is cooling fast. By the time you return downstairs, no one mentions your absence. Because winter baths, like illness and servants, are not discussed in polite company. They simply happen in the margins. You descend the stairs with damp hair pinned neatly beneath your lace cap, your skin slightly pink from scrubbing, your composure intact. There's a faint chill still clinging to the small of your back despite the layers of linen and wool now wrapped around you. But you say nothing, always nothing. The parlour is warmer than before. Someone must have bribed the houseboy to tend the fire early. You slip into your usual seat and take up your embroidery frame. The others don't even look up. That's how you know you've done it right. There is a rhythm to cleanliness in winter, and it's a quiet one. You're meant to appear fresh but not scrubbed, glowing but not flushed. To look too clean is to look like you tried too hard, and trying is the gravest sin of all in a house where everything is meant to seem effortless. Your sister joins you a moment later, a faint hint of violet water trailing her. She's already composed, her eyes lined with just enough kohl to look alert, her gloves pulled on but not yet buttoned. You glance at each other, both knowing what the other has endured in separate dressing rooms. Neither of you speaks of it. Across the room, your cousin Geoffrey lounges by the fire with a newspaper, the very picture of masculine ease. He hasn't bathed in 3 days. Of this, you're quite sure. And no one will mention it. Not unless his collar starts to yellow. Even then, it will be raised as a question, not a criticism. Is your laundress unwell? The gender divide in winter hygiene is as stark as the difference between the drawing room and the scullery. For women, cleanliness is expectation. For men, it's a suggestion. One that can be dismissed if the boots are shined and the cravat tied correctly. You sip tea, the cup warm but the liquid tepid. Everything this season is lukewarm. Water, expectations, expressions, even the compliments. From the window, you spot the neighbour's daughter, Clara May, stepping into a waiting carriage. Her hair is loose beneath her bonnet, a scandal in itself. Worse, she's flushed. Not with cold, but from speed. She must have been late. You and your sister exchange a glance, there'll be talk, and the talk will begin with her hair. "Did you see Clara May this morning?" someone will whisper. "She looked windswept," someone else will add. Then the real verdict. "Poor dear, I suppose it's hard to find good help these days." Because the fault never lies with the weather, or the schedule, or the girl herself. It lies with her presentation. Damp hair equals disorder. Disorder equals decline. You glance at your own reflection in the parlour mirror, a trick you've mastered, doing so without appearing vain. The cap sits properly, the cheeks modestly pink, nothing to draw attention, just the right amount of visible effort. Behind you, the fire shifts, sending a crackle through the room. Your brother turns a page. No one speaks. The silence is gentle and heavy and cold around the edges. And somewhere downstairs your bath water is being poured out into the snow-filled yard. A ritual as old as the house itself. Warm up, scrub down, forget it ever happened. Tomorrow you'll do it all again. Because winter in this world isn't something you talk about. It's something you polish out of sight. The snow is thicker today, packed hard into the cobbles, pressed smooth by iron-shod hooves and boot soles. The world outside the townhouse has gone soft and grey, every sound muffled except the occasional distant jangle of carriage bells. Your mother decides it's time to visit your aunt in Kensington. Not for any particular reason, but because winter requires appearances to be kept. Even cold can't excuse social absence, not without a doctor's note or a whispered tragedy, so you prepare. The carriage is ready by 1:30, pulled around by the footman with his scarf tucked so high you can barely see his nose. You and your sister are already dressed in your outerwear, gloves, cloaks, muffs, and a shawl over the bonnet, just in case the wind is stronger near the river. The ride itself is uneventful if rattling. You count 16 chimney pots spewing smoke along the rooftops, and at least 3 boys sliding recklessly across icy steps. You see a woman fall, her hat skidding into the street like a spun coin. The gentleman with her hesitates, then picks it up before helping her. You exchange a glance with your sister. "Not a marriage proposal, then," she murmurs. You smirk behind your gloved hand. When you arrive, your aunt's maid greets you at the door and ushers you straight into the drawing room, already half filled with family and other guests who, like you, are all pretending to be warm. You take your place, perched politely on a tufted chair near the hearth, though not too near. The circle is already formed. The room is full of social calculation. Every boot that enters leaves a trace of slush. Every lapel is inspected for salt stains. Every seat carries an implication, and then it happens. The door swings wide and a gentleman steps in, tall, fair-haired, and visibly chilled. His cheeks are ruddy, his scarf askew, and his breath still frosts in the doorway. He is, in every sense, improperly warm. Yet no one says a thing. He removes his gloves too quickly. His fingers are red from the cold, and as he pulls his coat free, a fine dusting of snow falls to the carpet. You can see Mrs. Hargrove, the oldest in the room, visibly twitch at the sight of it. And then comes the moment everyone dreads, seating. There are only 2 chairs unoccupied. One is by the door, close enough to catch every gust of air when the maid enters with the tea. The other, perilously, lies near the fire right beside you. He chooses the fire. You smile, because you must. He lowers himself carefully, but not before catching your eye and offering the smallest, most self-aware expression of apology. And that is where the trouble begins. Because sitting beside someone near a winter fire, even for half an hour, is a kind of intimacy that no drawing room etiquette manual can quite erase. It's unspoken, but everyone understands. Shared warmth implies shared something else. Perhaps not affection, but familiarity. A sort of domestic preview. Your aunt's expression tightens by a fraction. Your sister lifts a teacup with new interest. Someone across the room coughs in a way that suggests commentary, not illness. And you do what you've been trained to do. You don't lean in. You don't shift away. You stay perfectly still, eyes straight ahead, gloved hands folded in your lap, your posture betraying nothing except the fact that you know exactly what's happening. Because in winter, especially in public, every glance by the fire becomes a kind of dance step. And now, you're in it. The fire crackles between you. You keep your gaze forward, your expression composed, but your skin hums with the awkwardness of shared proximity. Too close, and you risk seeming familiar. Too stiff, and you'll appear flustered. An even worse offence in this house where subtlety is king and discomfort is a private language. The gentleman, Mr. Hensley you recall now, adjusts the cuff of his coat and says, in a voice pitched precisely for polite drawing-room conversation, "The roads from Richmond are nearly impassable. I counted 3 carriages in ditches before noon." Your aunt tuts softly. "Dreadful," she says, not looking up from her embroidery. You offer a well-measured nod. "You must have left very early." "Before breakfast," he replies, smiling faintly. "Though I imagine the scones I missed were worth less than this fireplace." A few chuckles. "Not yours. You resist. But still, he spoke to you first. Not your sister, not your aunt. You. And now the room knows." Mrs. Hargrove leans slightly toward your mother and murmurs something behind her teacup. Your mother replies with a slight narrowing of the eyes, a silent reminder that this drawing-room has ears sharper than ice on a windowsill. Mr. Hensley continues to warm his hands near the fire, just a touch closer than necessary. It's not scandalous, it's not even improper, but it's memorable, and that's what matters. You remember a story told last winter about 2 cousins who attended a card party and accidentally shared a foot warmer under the table. One married 6 months later. The other was never invited back to the hostess's home. The line between intimacy and error is razor thin in a Victorian parlour. Someone begins to pour tea. The tray is passed your way. And now comes a fresh hazard. The exchange of cups. Tea etiquette in winter is a silent battlefield. The cup must be accepted without clumsiness. Gloves must be removed only at the wrist. No steam must fog your spectacles if you wear them. No biscuit must crumble onto the carpet, and above all you must not appear affected by the warmth of the porcelain. Your hands, still flushed from the bath, now chilled again from the draught, grip the cup just so. The saucer remains steady. You thank the pourer, Lady Attlebridge, with a practised smile. Across the fire, Mr. Hensley watches you with a trace of curiosity. Not flirtation, he wouldn't dare, but something softer. A kind of amused respect, perhaps, as if he too knows you're threading the needle of decorum. Your sister clears her throat, not in illness, but signal. Time to move on. You nod, and together you rise, crossing to admire the new Chinese porcelain figurine your aunt has recently acquired. As you pass, You feel the warmth of the fire fall away from your skirts like a lifted curtain. Behind you, Mr. Hensley rises as well. He does not follow. He knows better. But he stands until you're seated once again. Later, in the carriage ride home, your sister says only, "You sat rather near the fire." You glance at her, then out the frosted window. "It was the only chair." She smiles faintly. "Of course." You say nothing more, because in winter, when the days are short and the rooms are dim, it isn't what's said aloud that marks a reputation. It's what's noticed in the flicker of firelight and carefully not discussed afterward. The frost thickens as evening falls, and the house shrinks inward as if curling into itself for warmth. But you have one more duty today: letters. Not the idle correspondence of Sunday afternoons, or the scribbled thank-you notes after supper, but proper winter letters. The kind you compose in silence, seated upright at a chilly desk, with hands half numb in gloves that you only remove finger by finger. You light the lamp beside your writing desk. The flame flickers hesitantly, casting long shadows across the inkwell. The air smells of old paper, beeswax polish, and a faint mineral tang from the windowpane's icy breath. You pull the lap blanket tighter around your legs and flex your fingers. There are 3 letters to write. One to your cousin in Dover, one to your mother's friend in Brighton, and one, most delicately, to a gentleman your aunt believes might be taking notice. That last one is the true test. The other 2 are practice. You dip your pen into the ink pot, careful not to drip. The ink has grown sluggish in the cold, and you must warm the nib slightly between your fingers before it will flow. Your first line comes slowly. "Dearest Eleanor." Your hand trembles just slightly, not from nerves, from cold. Letter writing in winter is an art of restraint. You must write warmly, but not too warmly. Affectionate, but not clingy. Seasonal greetings are expected, of course, but avoid sentimentality. Anything too cheerful will seem disingenuous. Anything too mournful, melodramatic. And of course there is the etiquette of ink. Black ink is proper, blue is acceptable, green is eccentric, red is reserved for debt collectors and dangerous women. Your aunt once gasped aloud when a letter arrived written in purple. "A woman of uncertain morals," she declared, and refused to answer. You finish Eleanor's letter with a brief account of the frost fair. Not the cold, not the aching feet, not the cracked gloves, just the facts. The river froze solid. Booths were erected. A gentleman juggled oranges. You seal the letter with a wafer and press it shut. The second letter, to your mother's friend in Brighton, is shorter. You do not know her well. She is older, fond of long paragraphs and longer opinions. You match her tone, rambling but tight-laced. You mention your recent bath with great subtlety. The fire in the dressing room held nicely this week, which was a small mercy. She will understand. And then the third letter. This one requires pause. You've only met Mr. Linden twice, once at the New Year's luncheon, once at church. But he remembered your name both times. He also, critically, noticed your gloves were trimmed in mother-of-pearl buttons. A rare detail, he'd said. You weren't sure if he meant it as praise or inspection. Now, as you prepare to write, your breath clouds faintly before you. You dip the pen, hesitate, and begin. Dear Mr. Linden, your kind remarks at the luncheon have stayed with me longer than the scent of the pine wreaths, which have, sadly, begun to dry and fall. You pause. Too poetic? Perhaps, but let it stay. The letter continues. A reference to the weather, to the condition of the carriage roads, to a mutual acquaintance's overzealous use of coal. You fold it precisely, seal it in a clean envelope and set it aside to be franked tomorrow. 3 letters, 3 versions of yourself, all neatly stacked, silent, perfect. Because in winter, words are not just for warmth. They are for precision, for positioning, for survival. You flex your hand and reach for your gloves. There's still frost on the inside of the window. You blow gently on the sealed envelopes, watching the wax cool and harden into little domes of silence. They gleam red beneath the lamplight, proper, traditional, and just formal enough to carry meaning without risk. You arrange them in the post tray beside the door. In this house, even the act of sending a letter is part of the performance. Back at your desk, the ink has begun to crust at the rim of the well. You cap it neatly, wipe the nib, and fold away your writing cloth with the same care a servant might fold a shroud. There's something about winter letters. They always feel like confessions stitched into lace. From the corridor comes a faint clatter. The footman is collecting outgoing correspondence. He never knocks, never says a word. You hear the soft rustle of envelopes as they disappear into his satchel, bound for the chilly pillar box at the end of the square. You imagine the long walk in the evening fog, the way the iron slot bites cold fingers. You wonder if Mr. Linden will read your letter by firelight or by gas lamp, and whether he'll notice the loop in your capital G. The room quiets. Outside, a dog barks once. Farther still, a distant carriage wheel skids briefly on the cobblestones. You stretch your fingers, wincing. They're stiff again. The writing may be done, but the cold remains. Your sister appears in the doorway, cheeks pink, bonnet strings askew. "The lamp's gone out in the stairwell," she says. "I nearly broke my neck." You glance up. "And did you manage to fall gracefully?" "Of course," she replies with a grin, "but only because no one was watching." You both laugh, but softly. The room absorbs the sound like cloth. She steps in, warming her hands near the desk lamp. "Did you write him?" You know who she means. You nod. "Did you mention the snow?" "Briefly, and the oranges." "Good," she says. "That sounds sufficiently forgettable." You raise a brow. "Isn't forgettable the opposite of what I'm aiming for?" She shrugs, the corners of her mouth twitching. "Not if he's clever." She disappears again, leaving only a trace of cool air and the smell of wool behind her. You sit for a while longer, watching the window. The frost has crept higher along the pane, feathering like some frozen fern. The candle wavers. You imagine the postal, boy arriving at the box, breath visible, scarf damp with fog. You wonder if he reads the names on the letters, if he thinks about the stories tucked inside. There's something almost intimate about winter correspondence, how much you can say and how much more you must leave unsaid. A poorly chosen word in summer may be forgiven. In winter it freezes in place. And of course, the real trick isn't the writing, it's waiting. Waiting for the reply, waiting for the glance, waiting to see whether your words will be returned to you, reflected in someone else's ink and sealed in someone else's wax. You slip your writing gloves back on and close the desk. Outside, the street is silent. The only light comes from the flickering gas lamps in the occasional window, glowing faintly like a heartbeat behind frost-covered glass. Your letter is out there now, and in Victorian winter, that's as close as you're allowed to come to hope. The snow has stopped. That should be good news. But the stillness it leaves behind is heavier than noise, like the world has been pressed under a thick quilt of silence and expectation. You wake to that hush, the kind that blankets more than rooftops. It settles on your shoulders the moment you dress, in the way no one speaks above a murmur, in the faint pressure behind every glance. Today is a drawing room day. No outings, no errands, no walks. The world outside is sealed in white, and the hearth becomes the centre of gravity. Everyone gathers in the parlour not because they wish to, but because they must. Winter draws you together like coals drawn into a single flame, reluctant, slow, and crackling. You arrive late enough that the fire has been stoked, and early enough to avoid the bad seats. You settle between the fern stand and the piano, a spot just warm enough to prevent shivering, but far enough from the hearth to suggest modesty. Your mother is knitting something beige. She's always knitting in winter. The colour changes, but the rhythm does not. Your brother lounges near the fire, one boot turned sideways, ignoring the stiffness in your mother's expression. Your aunt is darning a cuff. Your sister leafs through a periodical, not reading. No one reads in full on drawing room days. You skim, you comment, you gesture at articles like a seagull pecking crumbs. Then the conversation begins, slowly, and with all the grace of a curtsy on ice. "Did you hear about the Abernethys?" your aunt begins. "They've taken in a companion." That word, companion, hangs in the air like a snowflake too heavy to fall. "A widow?" your mother asks. "No," says your aunt. "A niece, though some say she's only called a niece." Your sister doesn't look up. Well, it's not as though the Abernethys ever cared about appearances. The fire snaps. You sip your tea. This is the ritual. The drawing room is not a place for rest. It's a performance hall. You must speak just enough to seem engaged, but never so much as to dominate. Your wit must be sharp, but not slicing. Your permitted opinion, but only if it wears a bonnet and speaks in a lower register. At one point, your cousin tries to make a joke, something about the milk freezing before it reached the tea. It doesn't land. Your aunt replies with a look that could curl lace. You think of the soot incident days ago, when the chimney backfired during correspondence hour. No one has spoken of it since, but you can feel it in the way your uncle avoids sitting too close to the hearth. The drawing room remembers things, not out loud, but in glances, in cushions stiffened by posture, in the way no one leaves a spoon resting on a saucer for too long. Later, your sister murmurs that her hands are cold. Your mother says, "Use your gloves." "But I'm indoors." "Then fold them, hold them, occupy yourself." Cold hands invite commentary. You tuck your own hands under your lap, blanket. You hadn't even realised they'd gone numb. You'd think that in a room full of people you'd feel seen, but winter etiquette isn't about visibility, it's about propriety. You must be present, but never intrusive. Elegant, not expressive. Poised, but not performative. Except, of course, that everything is performance. The fire flares, no one moves, and you sit composed and careful while your fingertips go slowly, invisibly cold. The clock ticks gently over the mantel, each chime measuring not time but tolerance. Drawing room hours pass slowly, polished, tedious, and brittle as porcelain. You've shifted twice in your chair, each time calculating the movement to seem natural. Too still, and you appear brooding. Too much motion, and you appear restless. Both a suspect. Across from you, your brother begins humming, softly, absently, some muddled tune from a music hall he should not have visited. Your aunt stiffens. Your mother clears her throat. No words are exchanged, but the humming fades. This is how Victorian drawing rooms work. Silent correction by symphony of throat clearing. Your cousin drops her embroidery needle and lets it roll across the floor. She does not chase it. Chasing would be improper. So instead the maid is summoned, not by name of course, but with a soft bell. The girl arrives, hair slightly frizzed from the kitchen's heat, fingers red from scrubbing. She stoops to retrieve the needle, and for one breathless second you see it. A burn mark on the back of her wrist, old, pale, shaped like the corner of an iron. Your aunt says, "Thank you," but doesn't look at her. The girl leaves. The silence resumes. Your sister closes her periodical with a subtle snap. This article suggests gentlemen should begin wearing lined waistcoats by mid-December. I can't help but think we've passed the point of suggestion. Your brother grins. My waistcoat is lined, with ambition. It's not a good joke, but everyone chuckles. because it's safer to indulge a gentleman's mediocrity than to ignore it. You smile too. Properly. Just enough teeth. And then Mrs. Lockmere arrives. She is late. She is always late. She wears furs too heavy for indoors and perfume too strong for confined space. But she brings news, and that is currency here. I passed the Havisham house on the way over, she announces, settling herself like a theatrical heroine. They've covered the windows. Gasps. Not of horror, but anticipation. Your mother leans forward. Is someone ill? Mrs. Lockmere nods. The eldest son returned from Cambridge with a cough, a bad one, and apparently, she lowers her voice, they've moved him to the back of the house. No visitors. Your cousin clicks her tongue. Always so theatrical, the Havishams. Probably just a sore throat. Or worse, your sister adds softly. You know what a back room means. No one answers, but everyone knows. You're not meant to say consumption. You're not meant to say fever. These are words for doctors and undertakers. In polite society, illness is draped in euphemism. He's resting, she's weak, they've taken a quieter room. It is not illness that kills reputations. It is the acknowledgement of illness. You sip your tea, now cold. You glance at the hearth, steady, indifferent. Someone mentions the piano. Would it be too forward to request a piece? Perhaps, unless it's Chopin. Chopin is always safe, melancholy, refined, undemanding. Your sister is asked to play. She does, softly. Her gloved fingers move like memory over the keys. The music fills the space between glances, between fears, between spoken and unspoken anxieties. When she finishes, no one claps, they nod. Because in the Victorian winter drawing room applause is too loud. Approval should be folded like linen and stored for later. You think of the Havisham boy. You think of his windows shuttered and silent. You adjust your shawl, though you are already warm. No one speaks of endings, only pauses. The first hint of festivity arrives not with joy, but with pressure. It begins when your mother declares the hallway wreath insufficient. Too brittle, she says, examining the holly with a pinched expression. It sends the wrong message. You're not quite sure what message a wreath is meant to send, but in this house, every sprig, every ribbon, every branch of dried orange peel is an instrument in the seasonal symphony of respectability. Christmas in a Victorian household isn't about wonder or warmth. It's about presentation. The rules of winter etiquette intensify as the holiday nears. The cold may deepen, but so must your hospitality. There must be an air of cheer, even if your fingers are numb, your boots still damp, and your sister hasn't stopped coughing in 3 days. And so the house transforms. You're summoned to assist in the drawing room, the heart of this annual production. There's garland to drape, but not too low. Cards to arrange on the mantel, from important correspondence first, family second, and the tree to be carefully trimmed. Each ornament is inspected, each candle stub measured. You're assigned the delicate task of hanging the crystal stars, because your hands are steady, and more importantly, your taste is restrained. You nod dutifully and begin. The drawing room tree is not like the one in the servants' hall. That one is noisy and bright, decked with scraps of coloured paper and gingerbread cutouts that are more enthusiasm than art. Yours is elegant, subdued. There must be no clashing, no irregular spacing. Even the apples hung from red silk threads must be polished. Your aunt supervises from her armchair, teacup in hand. Gold on the left side, she says, never the right. It catches the morning light. You wonder if she is aware that the tree is nowhere near a window. Downstairs, you hear the clatter of crates being opened. More decorations, more candles, more proof of abundance. But upstairs, everything must seem effortless, as though the pine cones arranged in the hall simply fell into symmetry, as though the satin bows tied themselves overnight. Once the tree is dressed, the hearth is refreshed. Not too many logs, it must not seem wasteful. Just enough flame to glow against the glass baubles and cast soft flickers across the brass. A servant is sent to dust the candelabras. Your mother repositions the nativity figurines. Mary must never face away from the guests. Your sister adjusts the tinsel, despite the fact that she's always claimed it looks like metallic seaweed. Then comes the matter of the guest list. A sheet is unrolled on the writing desk and names are debated like chess pieces. Not the Percivals, says your mother. They served blancmange in porcelain last year. Of course not, says your aunt. And the Barretts are still recovering from the niece's wedding. Too soon to entertain again. Your name is mentioned only once when someone asks whether you have enough gloves to last the week. You do. You always do. As evening draws near, your father appears in the doorway, dusting pine needles from his cuffs. "Will we be hanging the token ribbons?" he asks, almost playfully. Your mother blinks. "The token ribbons are for Christmas Eve." He smiles faintly and retreats, muttering, "Ah, yes, my mistake." You and your sister exchange a look. He forgets every year. Later, as you sit beside the now decorated tree, its ornaments gleaming like polished manners, you wonder how much of this is truly for celebration and how much for inspection. In Victorian winter, Christmas doesn't melt the rules. It sharpens them in silver and hangs them on every branch. By the time the guests arrive for the holiday evening, the house has been transformed into something that looks effortlessly festive. If you ignore the hours of orchestration behind every garland, bow, and ribbon-draped banister. Candles are lit with a timing so precise it might as well be military. The fires are stoked to peak glow, and the air is heavy with cinnamon, citrus, and quiet panic. You're dressed in your winter best. A pine green gown with black velvet piping, gloves so new they squeak when you move your fingers, and a brooch borrowed from your mother's locked cabinet, just for tonight. You're told to stand by the parlour door to greet arrivals with a smile. Warm enough for the season, but not so warm as to invite intimacy. The doorbell rings, and so it begins. Mr. and Mrs. Anstruther first, smelling faintly of sherry and wet wool. Then the Holloways, whose daughter is rumoured to be engaged, though no one has confirmed it aloud. Each guest brings with them not just a coat and a calling card, but the potential for judgment. Whether their boots are polished, whether their children curtsy correctly, whether their breath fogs when they speak, because that would mean they didn't keep the carriage heated. Small talk commences with the same precision as the candle lighting. Bracing, isn't it? Yes, but not unkind. I do hope this cold holds through the new year. A green Christmas is so undecided. Your aunt begins the tour of decorations as though revealing treasures in a museum. "The ribbons are real silk," she explains to Mrs. Holloway, who nods without blinking. You can almost hear her calculating the cost and whether hers will need to match. In the drawing room, the tree stands tall and obedient in the corner, glowing softly under lamplight. The candles are lit just far enough apart to avoid suspicion of economy, but not so closely as to appear theatrical. Your cousin positions himself near the piano with a book of carols, ready, if requested, but never eager. You hover by the tea tray, handing out biscuits with a calculated air of someone who's never once broken one in half by mistake. Your gloves grow sticky with crumbs, but you dare not remove them. Your sister manages to excuse herself at precisely the right moment, leaving you to manage the children, two small boys who have taken to hiding beneath the settee and giggling whenever Mrs. Anstruther leans over. Your mother catches your eye across the room. She gives the smallest nod, and you respond in kind. The dance continues. Then comes the inevitable, the gift exchange. Each guest was instructed to bring a token, a candle, a card, something handmade or faintly useful. It must not be expensive, but it must look expensive. The illusion is everything. You hand your parcel, a folded paper fan, delicately painted by your sister and tied with green ribbon, to Mrs. Holloway. She smiles with a stiffness that suggests mild confusion, perhaps offence. You wonder if she expected lace or something French. She gives you a sachet of lavender tied in tulle. It smells slightly of soap and regret. A man near the fireplace receives a carved matchbox holder and pretends not to wince. The boy beside him is handed a book of nature poems and stares at it like it's a punishment. But no one complains, no one sighs, everyone smiles. Because Christmas is not about joy, not here. It's about performing joy convincingly enough that no one dares look behind the tinsel. Later, when the guests are gone and the fire is low, your mother surveys the scattered ribbons and smudged teacups with narrowed eyes. "Well," she says, "I think it went beautifully." You say nothing. That's the correct answer. In this season, silence is the most festive etiquette of all. By the time Christmas has passed, the house settles into a strange rhythm. Slower, quieter, but tenser, as if everyone is waiting for the next frost to crack something beneath them. It's in these days after the holiday that the cold truly sinks into the bones. Not just the house's bones, though the windows breathe frost and the door frames have begun to shrink, but yours. And it's now, with the tree still wilting politely in the corner and the last of the mince pies gone stale on the sideboard, that the whispers of courtship begin to grow sharper. You hear it first over tea, in that particular voice your aunt uses when she's building towards something dangerous. "Did you see how Mr. Linden handed you the hymnal on Christmas Eve?" she says without looking up from her mending. You glance sideways. "He was seated beside me. He could have passed it through your sister. He chose not to." You want to laugh, but you don't. Because in Victorian winter, a gloved hand brushing another across the spine of a hymn book is enough to set 4 households whispering. The rules around winter courtship are particular. Flirtation in summer can be playful, shaded walks, soft fans, and the occasional shared peach at a picnic. But winter requires structure. There are no lingering strolls down garden paths, no ballrooms filled with candlelight and excuses. Instead, there are drawing rooms heavy with coal smoke and eyes that watch every movement, as though they're noting down confessions for future reference. That afternoon, a note arrives. Not a letter, a note. Folded neatly, delivered via footman, hand-addressed in a script that you can't mistake. Mr. Linden requests permission to call. You don't blush. You do, however, carefully adjust your posture so your mother won't think you're anticipating anything. She reads the note aloud, then reads it again silently. "He writes with a steady hand," she murmurs, as if that confirms the condition of his soul. And then, without consulting you, she says, "We'll receive him on Thursday. You'll wear the plum." The plum refers to a dress you received last winter. Wool, modest neckline, buttons of jet. It's not your favourite, but it sits properly at the waist and makes your shoulders seem narrower, which apparently matters. Thursday arrives with snow, not enough to cancel the visit, but enough to sharpen the mood. The drawing room is set like a trap. Fresh coals, polished silver, a strategically placed volume of Cowper's poems beside the settee. You're told not to seat yourself until he arrives. Positioning is everything. You're to enter after he is announced, not before. Not too soon, not too slowly. Mr. Linden arrives precisely on the hour, his boots brushed clean, his scarf dusted with snow like powdered intent. He bows, appropriately deep, and you curtsy in response. And then, silence. The maid pours tea, you offer the plate of biscuits. He takes one. Everyone waits. "Well," he says, "London is pale today." Your mother replies with a smile. "It does tend toward grey this time of year." You watch him. He's seated just across from you, not too near, not too far. His gloves rest on the table. You can't help but notice one finger's frayed slightly at the seam. Fraying is forgivable, if it's subtle. You fold your hands in your lap and offer your best neutral smile. The game has begun. Your sister later describes it as the most uncomfortable half hour I've ever witnessed without anyone actually bleeding. But during the visit itself, no one acknowledges the tension. That would be impolite. Instead, everyone leans heavily on the accepted etiquette of winter courtship visits. After his remark on the weather, Mr. Linden makes a second attempt. "The holly in your window box still looks lively," he says, and you nod politely, even though it's actually quite withered and was discreetly replaced yesterday. "You keep it well," he adds. "I don't keep it," you reply with a smile. "I merely admire it." Your aunt, seated with embroidery she isn't stitching, lets out a low that might be approval, or indigestion, or both. The entire visit proceeds in this ritualized dance. Measured glances, phrases polished by the cold, long pauses during which the fire crackles helpfully to fill the silence. No personal feelings may be expressed. No hands may be offered. If a gentleman has intentions, he must offer them not with words, but with hints. He does not ask about your interests, but he does say, "There is a performance of Handel's Messiah next Friday. I find the altos particularly moving." This is an invitation in Victorian terms. You reply, "Yes, the altos do sound rather like heartbreak, softened by snowfall." This is an acceptance, delivered poetically, of course, to preserve plausible deniability. He leaves before the half-hour mark, as is proper. The footman takes his coat. Your aunt remarks, once he's gone, "His boots were a bit short in the toe." Unmarried men often misjudge their own length. You want to scream. Instead, you go to the window and watch him step back into the street, his figure shrinking into the fog. You wonder whether his fingers are cold, or if his heart is as tightly buttoned as his frock coat. The next day, a small parcel arrives. It's not from Mr. Linden, it's from his sister, a soft token gesture of interest, a ribbon bookmark sewn with your initials, hand-stitched, precise. This is not a gift, this is a message. You are seen. You are now part of the circle. You're expected to reply, with something equally modest, something with thought, but not too much thought. A sachet of lavender, perhaps, a calling card placed slightly out of alignment to show human hand. The rules of winter courtship are not written, but they are enforced. If you deviate from the sequence, you signal impropriety, or worse, desperation. Evening falls. You sit by the hearth with your embroidery, the little bookmark resting on the table beside your tea. You haven't replied yet. That would be too fast. It's essential to appear unhurried, even if your thoughts are pacing in circles. Your sister speaks softly from the armchair. "Do you like him?" You hesitate. "I don't know." "That's probably ideal," she says. "Liking someone makes all this far too dangerous." You laugh, but quietly, because she's right. In Victorian winter, affection is a flame you hide in your pocket, kept close, fed in secret, never exposed to the cold air of reality. Courtship isn't a romance, it's a dance performed on frost-bitten marble, with gloves on under supervision. And you're learning the steps. Morning begins not with sunlight, but with a draft. It slinks under your door, tugs at your blankets, and reminds you, none too gently, that the festive season may be past, but the true winter has only just arrived. The windows rattle faintly in their frames, the glass rimmed with a fuzz of ice so fine it looks like lace. You rise cautiously, knowing what awaits. Household accounts day. It happens every January. The ledgers come out, the quills are trimmed, the fire is stoked a little less generously, because this is the season not of merriment, but of reckoning. You shuffle into the breakfast room to find your mother already seated at the long table, spectacles balanced on the tip of her nose, ledgers fanned out like battle plans. She doesn't look up. The coal bill is higher than last year. You pour tea. It was colder. We had guests more frequently. Guests require heat. You don't answer. There's no defence against arithmetic. January etiquette dictates that household economies must tighten, but with grace. The trick is to appear unchanged. The drawing room must still gleam, the silver must still shine, the parlour fire must still be lit before the first footman dares to yawn. But elsewhere, behind closed doors, sacrifices begin. Servants are dismissed, quietly, with references. One of the housemaids is suddenly off visiting her aunt. She will not return. Candles are burned lower. Dinners become simpler. Roast beef becomes mutton. Mutton becomes stew. And always there is the ledger. You're expected to take part. Not in the actual sums, heavens no, but in the aesthetic of thrift. You fold old ribbons for reuse. You suggest that your cousin's worn gloves might be charmingly rustic if rehemmed. When your father raises an eyebrow at the idea of omitting sweet courses on Wednesdays, you say, "It's rather French, isn't it? Restraint." He seems pleased by that. He's always been suspicious of overindulgence since the goose fat incident. There's also Inventory Day, which involves the most delicate of dances. Determining which gifts received during the holidays can be quietly repurposed. A scarf too bold in colour might suit a cousin in Shropshire. A box of sugared violets could be rewrapped and passed to a family with fewer scruples about expiration. You assist with the labelling, using the slanted handwriting you reserve for polite deception. Your mother holds up a pair of lace-edged handkerchiefs. Too romantic, you nod, suggests intimacy. She places them in the basket marked for friends with sons. There's a certain bleak comedy to it all, the way January forces you to rehearse humility. You play at simplicity while desperately preserving appearances. It's like acting poor in a theatre made of mahogany. And yet, you understand it. Winter etiquette demands this. Not just the frost-hard smile or the strained pleasantries, but the entire facade of control. To appear undaunted, untouched by the season's bite. Because the moment you seem cold or hungry or anxious, people talk. And worse, they remember. So you sit beside your mother, tallying the invisible debts of December, pretending not to notice that the parlour coals are already burning low. As the cold deepens and the days remain stubbornly grey, winter etiquette shifts from public performance to private resilience. The parties have faded, the guests return to their frosty estates, and now only the household remains, navigating the long, lean stretch of January with a stiff upper lip and a quietly fraying hem. Behind closed doors, the family grows quieter. The silence isn't unpleasant exactly, just thin. Conversations are shorter. Laughter feels like an effort. Even the cat seems to walk more softly, as if she too is conserving heat. And with the quiet comes a renewed attention to the unwritten rules of winter conduct. This is the season of graceful austerity. Not poverty, heavens no, but the appearance of prudence. To be seen enjoying too much too openly in January would mark a family as tasteless, even vulgar. And so, the art of doing less, while pretending you prefer it, becomes a full-time occupation. You've taken to writing letters in the morning, not out of inspiration, but out of obligation. Letters must still be sent. Alliances must be preserved. Your tone is light but thoughtful. You thank a cousin for the dried oranges. Never mind they arrived with mould. You compliment an acquaintance's musical recital, though you fell asleep halfway through it. Every phrase is carefully chosen to suggest that your household remains serene, stable, and socially impeccable. Your mother makes her own gestures. She mends handkerchiefs in front of the staff, just once a week, just long enough to suggest frugality without desperation. She reduces sugar in the tea, remarking, "It's quite the Parisian trend," even though you both know it's because the last order was short. Frugal breakfasts replace lavish ones. Toast replaces crumpets. Butter becomes sparing. The marmalade is stretched with a whisper of water. The cook is not amused. The parlour games, once a nightly ritual, now rotate through a smaller circle. You've played so much charades you've begun dreaming in mime. Your sister attempts a game of consequences and ends up with a story involving a bishop, 3 cats, and a scandalous misunderstanding about an umbrella. You laugh until your tea goes cold. That night, you slip into bed wearing socks, not for style, but because the fire was only lit for an hour and the sheets feel like glass. And still, you remind yourself, others are colder. To complain would be impolite. Even your dreams begin to reflect the season. You find yourself wandering endless hallways lined with coat hooks, searching for gloves you know you've already lost. In the dream, someone keeps whispering about coal rations. You wake up slightly ashamed. One evening, as the wind whistles through the chimney, your father quietly remarks, "A season like this separates the dignified from the merely wealthy." It's a strange compliment and a warning, because in this world, elegance is not proven by what you own, but by how little you seem to need. So you sip weak tea, write strong sentences, and learn to look cheerful by candlelight, because Victorian winter isn't survived with warmth, it's endured with composure, and you're becoming a master of it. You don't notice the first signs of thaw in the garden. They come quietly, meltwater threading down the edges of the lead-paned windows, a subtle drip from the eaves, a scent that isn't quite snow anymore. It's still cold, of course, but now the cold feels wet rather than brittle. The iron edge of midwinter has dulled. You're in the morning room when your sister gasps, "The crocuses are coming!" And sure enough, a few brave green shoots have pushed through the frost-clogged soil beneath the yew hedge. It's absurd, really. Nothing else has changed. The wind still nips your ears, the drawing-room fire still sulks with damp coal. And yet that small patch of stubborn life sends a ripple through the house. Spring is not here exactly, but it's been glimpsed, and that changes everything. Because in Victorian society, the tail end of winter is as socially delicate as a souffle. The rules begin to shift, slowly but decisively, just as tightly laced as before, but now tinged with expectation. Conversations are lighter. Calling cards are dropped off with more hopeful curls at the corner. The housemaid hums while scrubbing the stair rail. Even your mother unpacks a bolt of pale muslin and runs a fingertip along it as if testing sunlight. But here's the trick. You must not leap too soon. One of the cardinal sins of Victorian etiquette is appearing too eager for seasonal change. To pack away your winter furs before Lady Marchbanks does is practically a declaration of social rebellion. So everything must shift slowly, politely, and above all, collectively. Your gloves are still grey wool, but you switch to a narrower wrist. Your bonnet stays velvet, but now has fewer feathers, and the coal scuttle is only filled to the halfway mark, just in case someone might notice oversupplying. The afternoon calls begin again. Not the lavish holiday visits of December. These are different, briefer, more pointed. The intent now is to signal availability, a kind of slow, social unfreezing. The frost, both literal and figurative, is lifting. One such call arrives from the Lindens. Not Mr. Linden himself this time, but his sister and her companion. They arrive with hands pink from the chill and cheeks full of unspoken assessments. You serve tea and lemon cake. No one mentions the weather. Instead, Miss Linden remarks, We hear the concert series at Almack's may begin early this year. You nod. That depends on whether the March fogs agree. She smiles. I've always thought fog was more stubborn than frost. It's a harmless comment, and a loaded one, because fog here means uncertainty. It means delay. It means the lingering grip of winter on hearts that may or may not yet be ready to declare themselves. After they leave, your sister muses. I think she meant that as a challenge. You agree. But what exactly is being challenged remains delicately undefined. That evening, your father surprises you by discussing calendar dates over soup. If the frost doesn't return, he says, we'll host a dinner the second week of March. You almost drop your spoon. That's early and ambitious. But you nod, because you understand what's really happening. It's not just a dinner, it's the opening move. Preparations begin almost in secret. Not because anything is being hidden, but because to be seen preparing too eagerly would be vulgar. So the servants are instructed softly behind half-closed doors. Menus are whispered, not declared. And when you're caught sketching table arrangements on scrap paper, you immediately claim it's just an idle scribble. But everyone knows. The household is slowly winding up like a great wooden clock, each cog polished, each movement rehearsed, yet all under a veil of restraint. Because Victorian spring etiquette isn't about welcoming warmth with open arms. It's about testing the ice with one foot while pretending you never cared for skating anyway. The drawing room is freshened. Nothing dramatic, just a few green sprigs tucked into silver vases where holly once stood. Your mother swaps the winter curtains with ones of paler damask. The effect is subtle, like a sigh. Then comes the wardrobe. Oh, the exquisite agony of deciding how soon is too soon to wear lawn and muslin. Your winter gowns still hang in the armoire, heavy with velvet and solemnity. But you either lighter fabrics folded neatly on the shelf above, each one a whisper of coming brightness. You begin to make small substitutions. A lace collar on a wool dress, a silk ribbon in place of velvet. The rules allow this, provided it's done with discretion. Transition dressing, they call it. Like nature shedding bark in favour of blossom. Your father oversees the wine inventory. Your aunt insists the punch bowl be polished just in case, though she pretends to sneeze violently every time she leans too close to the silver polish. And when the dinner invitations go out, they are penned not in bold ink, but in the pale grey-green shade reserved for early spring affairs. A colour meant to say, we are hopeful, not hasty. The guest list is precise, not too long, lest it look like a celebration, not too short, lest it feel like desperation. A good balance of families with eligible sons and daughters, enough musical talent to fill a lull, one or two eccentrics for seasoning. The morning of the dinner, frost returns, just a whisper of it, a final warning. You feel it in the air as you walk to the conservatory, a chill that bites the inside of your nostrils, the kind of cold that mocks optimism. The cook mutters something dire about puddings falling. A footman slips on the steps and swears under his breath, earning a swift reprimand and a louder apology. But the plan does not change, because now it would be far worse to cancel. That would suggest fear, and Victorian etiquette despises fear. So the fires are stoked higher, the coals are brought out in full force despite last week's thrift. You wear your gown with a warm shawl draped just so, implying style rather than survival. And when the guests arrive, their cheeks are redder, their laughs more brittle, but no one admits they're cold. At dinner, Mr. Linden sits across from you. He wears a dark cravat with a green pin, subtle but spring-like. His gloves are thinner than last time. He says only, "It's good to see your household in such strong spirits." You smile and lift your glass. It's remarkable, you reply, what one can accomplish with good firewood and bad weather. Laughter follows. The candles flicker. Outside, winter growls once more. But in here, you've survived it. With style. And then, quite suddenly, it's over. You wake one morning and the frost is gone. Not thinned or softened, but truly vanished. The garden wall glistens not with ice, but with dew. The sky, though pale, holds a tone of blue that hasn't been seen in months. And somewhere, faint, incredulous, a bird is singing. You don't dare smile too quickly. Victorian etiquette, after all, frowns upon triumph. But as you sit at breakfast, nibbling a slice of toast that no longer tastes like rationing, you catch your sister's eye. And there it is, shared between you. Relief. Surviving a Victorian winter isn't about wool or coal or boiled beef. It's about appearances, dignity, the tireless preservation of a facade that says, we're not rattled by hardship. And now that performance can finally rest. Your mother declares it's time to air out the linen. The servants move through the halls with windows flung wide, sun pouring in like a long-lost guest. You hear laughter echoing down the corridor, not the polite kind, but something looser, almost undisciplined. It's alarming and beautiful. You step outside. For months the garden paths were treacherous, the hedges skeletal, the fountain nothing but an ice lump under a tarp. But now, life peeks out everywhere. Snowdrops cluster beside the path. A gardener whistles as he overturns the cold earth, unearthing the first earthworms of the season. Your shawl slips. You don't bother adjusting it. There's a kind of lawlessness to these first days of spring. The rules aren't gone, but they're stretched, loosened, worn at the edges. Everything feels both familiar and raw, like returning to a room you once lived in but haven't visited in years. Inside, the drawing room is being rearranged. Winter furniture, a bit heavier, more plush, is being covered, stored, replaced with chairs that suggest lightness. The piano's retuned. A fresh bouquet of daffodils sits in the hall, replacing the holly that lingered longer than anyone wanted to admit. Your father is reviewing the social calendar. Your aunt is arguing with the cook about whether lemon syllabub should be served on porcelain or glass. And you find yourself standing before the hall mirror, not to check your hair, but to study your face, to see what winter has left behind. There are no visible changes, and yet you feel altered. You endured a season of ice-bound pleasantries, dwindling candles, careful conversations and boiled puddings. You navigated flirtations under mistletoe, managed glances across frozen courtyards, held your posture while your teeth chattered. You survived Victorian winter, and you're not the same girl who greeted it. You're sharper now, gentler in some places, harder in others. You know what it means to smile when you're freezing, to offer tea when you're tired, to carry yourself with elegance when everything aches. Outside, a coach arrives. It's the first of many. The social thaw has begun in earnest. You recognise the Linden family crest, and you don't bother feigning surprise. You cross the hall with practised ease, lift your chin, and prepare to greet the guests. Spring is here, but you're no longer simply waiting for warmth. You're the one who welcomes it in. The drawing room fills with voices again. They echo brighter now, less constrained by cold smoke and cold toes. There's music too, not the brooding piano pieces of December, but lilting, hopeful melodies plucked on harp and fiddle. Someone jokes about surviving the siege of January. Laughter erupts, not polite titters, but something fuller, something that finally lets go. Miss Linden arrives in pale green, her gloves so thin they're practically ornamental. A risky move, sartorially. But no one calls it out. Instead, you offer her tea and quietly acknowledge her audacity with the subtlest of smiles. It's spring. The rules may be intact, but their enforcement is softening like the soil beneath your boots. Later that evening, your sister insists on stepping into the garden. "I want to feel it," she says. "The not winter." So you go, cloaks over gowns, boots crunching over paths still littered with the memory of frost. The sky is streaked with dusk purple and gold. A few brave buds dangle from the plum tree, and overhead the crows seem confused by the softness of the air. You walk silently for a while until she says, "It's funny, we did everything properly, all the rules, the teas, the calls, the dressing gowns, the ice etiquette." You glance at her. "And?" She shrugs, smiling. "And we're still standing." That's when it hits you. It wasn't the fires that kept you warm. It wasn't the boiled puddings, or the stiffly worded thank you notes, or even the layers of lace and velvet. It was the rituals, the rhythm, the knowing that everyone else was obeying the same strange little dance, that no matter how cold or hungry or bored or lonely, there were rules to follow, and in following them, you remained anchored. Etiquette wasn't a cage, it was a raft. Now, as the season shifts, you know the rules will change again. The visiting hours will lengthen, the acceptable sleeve lengths will shorten, the garden parties will multiply like rabbits, and before you know it, you'll be standing at someone's summer fete sipping elderflower cordial and pretending not to judge the state of their trellises. But for now you exhale, a real breath, no steam, just air. The house is behind you, the garden ahead. The rules of spring are still unwritten, but you're ready. You endured the hush, and the hush returned the favour. And when next winter rolls around, because it will, you'll face it again. Maybe with a new pair of gloves, maybe with new heartbreak, or a new crush, or a better brand of tea. But always with the same quiet grace Victorian winters demand. Because now you know the secret. In the end, it's not about looking perfect, it's about looking unbothered. Even when your toes are frozen, your suitor is clueless, and the coal scuttle's empty. And somehow, you made it look easy. So now, just settle into the quiet. You've walked through creaking hallways, sat stiffly at draughty dinner tables, and learned how to nod at gossip while sipping cold tea with a steady hand. You've endured layers of velvet, gritted your teeth through frost-bitten mornings, and smiled through silences so long they almost counted as conversations. And you did it with grace, even if your gloves were threadbare, even if the plum pudding was more soot than fruit, even if you secretly preferred spring dresses all along. You were there, in that long, strange, breath-held season where warmth was rare but civility never wavered. You followed every rule that didn't quite make sense, because in that world etiquette wasn't about being fancy. It was about surviving together, about showing up again and again with your buttons done and your manners intact. And now the fire's gone low. The lamp flickers. The windows rattle softly with the last sighs of the season. It's over. And so your body relaxes. Your breath deepens. The long Victorian winter fades behind you, replaced by something lighter, looser, warmer. Not just outside, but inside you too. Because now you know, you don't need spring to feel at peace. You just need a little quiet, a little kindness, and a hot brick wrapped in flannel tucked under your feet. Sleep well, dear listener. You've earned it.